This meeting is being recorded. It may or may not be broadcast. And so I'm going to open the meeting and ask for a roll. So this is Chris Reynolds. I'm here. Mary Hartman.
Here.
Andrea Zoll.
Here.
Greg Guerrello.
Here.
Dee Ortner.
Here.
John Hickling.
Here.
Dean Banfield.
Here.
Phil Swain.
Here.
Am I missing anybody? Okay, great. So I'll call the meeting to order. We have two sets of minutes. So if people have had a chance to look at those, I thought I would try and get those taken care of. Are people okay with that? Have they gone through the minutes from this would be a meeting from January 7th and then the 14th? Looks like we're good.
Yes, and I would move approval.
Okay, so,
Second.
Dee, you have a question or
No, I don't have a, Dee has a question.
Dee?
I have a question, not a question, I have a comment.
Okay,
It's on page 2.
okay, so these are the minutes from the 7th on page?
Yes,
2? Yep.
correct.
Yep.
And after the graph there, on the third line, it says approximately 3.8 times higher than the first round, which means that they were going to have the second round. And we were all very excited because it was like over $1 million. And at the school committee meeting on January 12th, it was corrected. And they said it is on the DESI emergency relief amount. So if you look on that last table, in the middle, it has DESI emergency relief right above the 3 lines. And it's 112,379. That is the number that would be multiplied by 3.8. And that was the information that they had. So that's all I wanted to mention on that. as a
Okay,
correction.
okay,
But
well,
not
that's,
for minutes.
yeah, we can't fix it, right, but that's good information. Thank you, Dee. That makes a big difference. It's good to
It
know.
does, considerable amount.
Any other comments or questions on the meetings of January 7th? Okay, so I will now take a motion to approve.
So moved?
Second.
Second? Okay, so we'll do a roll call vote. So Chris Reynolds, I'm a yes. Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll,
Yes.
Greg Guerrello,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
John Hickling,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Phil Swain,
Yes.
Dick Jamison,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo. You're on mute, Kathy. Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Give us your thumbs up.
Okay, yeah, Kathy Kukalo is a yes.
Yes,
Parashar Patel?
Yes.
Okay, great. So then we have a second set of minutes on the 14th. Any questions or discussion, findings, issues on those minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
Approve.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, great. So we'll do a roll call vote. Chris Reynolds, I'm a yes. Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll,
Yes.
Greg Guerrello,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
John Hickling,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Phil Swain,
Yes.
Dick Jamison,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
yes,
Brian Taylor. You're on mute, Brian.
Yes.
There we go. Parashar Patel.
Yes.
And I see Lois has joined us. So Lois, did you hear what we were just doing, or? We were looking for approval on the minutes of the 14th.
Yes, and I had trouble with the link. It wasn't clickable in the PDF.
No, I know you have to go back in and enter it manually. That's what I always have to do. You're right.
I just copy and paste it out of the PDF. That does tend to work.
Yeah.
well, I
I
can't,
couldn't do it.
I can't
No.
copy on the PDF.
Yeah.
It wouldn't let me do it. So anyway, I'm sorry.
No, if
That's
you
all
go to Concord, the Concord website. Concord.
Let me just finish the roll call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm
So-
sorry.
Ray Andrews, are you a yes? Yes, I know you're here. We're voting on the minutes from the 14th, Ray. Are you able to vote on those?
I was here, yes, for that. Yes. Yes.
Okay, great.
Aye.
Okay, so we have unanimous on the minutes. Great. Okay, so now we're going to move to a discussion of the preliminary guidelines. So that's our work for this evening. So we're going to vote tonight on a preliminary guideline, and it's the guideline and the allocation, right? So it'll be the amounts to the school, to the high school, to CPS, and to the town. So we have two elements of the work. So on a couple of days ago, I sent out a document, which I'll attempt to screen share. I've been practicing to see if I could do this. Let's see if I can. Oh, I might be able to. Ta-da!
It's good.
You can
Wow.
see it? Okay.
Yep.
I'm
Good job,
very proud
Chris.
of myself, very proud of myself. Okay, so I'm assuming you've all had a chance to look at that. So my goal is for us to, this is a proposal, right? So this is a starting point. So our discussion should be, I'll take you through it a bit. And then really I want to save most of the time for discussion around where we are and coming up with a guideline and then coming up with an allocation. So I'll flip through these pretty quickly. Stop me if you have a question on it. So let's see. Okay, so most of this we've already talked about. I did include some information on local economic factors, so you can see what's going on with unemployment. So certainly higher than where we've been historically, but a lot less than we were at the peak, which is sometime around May. I think it was up at 14%. Some good news on property tax collection. So consistent with prior years, receipts are really coming in very high. So we're close to our 99% rate, which is what we see historically in terms of collection, which is very good. I asked for some information on the amounts coming in or requests coming in for the senior means property tax exemptions. And they were running about 123,000 in FY21, and that's down a bit from FY20, and that's also down from FY19. So we're not seeing a spike in requests, at least at this point. And then I'm reminding you here about the sustainable growth rate, which is really our proxy for inflation, and that's still running. So we cut it in the summer in July, and it was 0.645. I went in and see if it had changed very much. And of course it hadn't. It's maybe about 0.7, 0.75. So inflation is still running fairly low. I wanted to just point out about the state aid. So we have a lot of uncertainty around state aid at the moment. However, both in our conversations with the school and in talking with Kerry, at least historically, even in periods of weak economic conditions, the state has not cut those numbers too much. So in terms of the number for the town, it runs around $5 to $6 million, and most of that is in Chapter 70 aid to CPS. At the high school, there's about 3.3 million. That's Chapter 70 and Chapter 71. And so those are the amounts that we're at risk a bit in terms of state. We don't yet know. Charlie Baker is going to supposedly issue his budget guidelines at the end of January. So that's a bit of an unknown at the moment. But
Chris?
Yes.
I
Yep.
just have a little bit of color on the one comment that I'd like to make on this slide, and that is the current unemployment rate of 5.4% also includes a degradation of the workforce. In other words, we have people who have left the workforce
Yes,
in
right.
big numbers. So that the 5.4% is 5.4% of the people who are saying that they're still in the workforce.
Right.
And if I could share my screen for 1 second, you can see the 2020 numbers, and then we can just move on. I just want to show everybody how that is. So if I could be allowed to share a shot. I cannot start screen sharing. Okay, here we go. Let's try. All right, I want to show this one. Okay. All right, so these numbers that you see here are the 2020 numbers. In January, we had 8,600 and 8,644 people in the labor force in February. And oh, sadly, you're kind of obscured, at least on my screen. Can you see the last column there that shows the percentage of unemployed? I don't know if we can see it because it's obscured by my little strip of players, but if I move that around, I can move that out of the way. So the unemployment rate was 2.0 in February, but now we have only 8,000 people in the labor force. That's 600 have evaporated. They're not in the labor force anymore. And we have a 5.6% unemployment rate of the folks who are still in the labor force. So it belies the fact that, you know, 5.4% is of what people are reporting, and that's my point. My point is that it's kind of worse than that number sort of reflects, because people have left and they were coming back. The labor force, you know, really dipped down to 7,000 in March. People were like gone in droves, but we're kind of curling back to a negative posture from 10 to 11 there. It's gone down. So it's still, we're in a challenging state of affairs right now. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. You know?
Good. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me move this guy back here now. Oh, for some reason, now I can't see oh, there we go. Okay. So let's go on. Oops. So local receipts. So this is a big factor for us, right? So this is
That's
state aid.
not shared.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can't see it?
No.
Not yet.
No.
What happened? What happened? Let me see. Now, can you see it?
No.
Oh.
Hey, Christine, would you like me to?
No, I think I do it.
There it is.
There you go, Chris. There you go, Chris.
Thank
Good.
you, Brian, but I did it. Dean, you screwed me up, Dean.
Sorry, Chris.
Okay, I was going so well.
Yeah,
All
we're
right,
doing great.
So local receipts, right? So this is the hardest hit that we know about. So in those amounts in FY20 were 8.6 million. And in 21, our budget is down almost 2 million to 6.8 million. And we, in our moderate scenario for FY22, we assume another decline of 6% based on Kerry's numbers. So that's the biggest impact to revenue in the numbers we're going to talk about tonight is the local receipts. And that's the hotels, the meals, the motor vehicle tax. That's where we have seen declines. We saw them in 20, we'll see them in 21, and we expect to see some more in 22. Talk about free cash for a minute. This is pretty important as well. So in last year, we were somewhere north of 11 million. We were talking about free cash, and there were a number of appropriations at the annual town meeting in September 2020, where appropriations were approved that bring that balance down. So we took, the number actually gets certified in a lagged, but so you could take the FY19 numbers and you back off what was approved. We expect to be somewhere, 6.5, 6.9 million, something like that in terms of free cash. And that's the lowest number I've seen of that. We have a floor per town policy at around 5% of the it would be the 21 budget, and that would be around 5.9 million. So there's really not much room in free cash at this point. The numbers that I'm going to take you through assume, as we've done in prior years, that there's $1 million from free cash to supplement or offset the tax bill in FY22. The good news is in that low number of 6.9 million, there's actually another million that I'll call receivable, which due to timing was paid in FY21, but was it's the cash is going to come in. So there's another $1 million coming in that we're due that's going to be in free cash, I believe, to replace the amount we're taking out if we use it to offset property tax. So that makes it feel a little bit better, but it's still tight. And that free cash is certainly one of the elements that's looked at by rating agencies and others in terms of the health of the town. So it's an important metric. Another reserve that we know about is that the high school is estimating that their E&D balance at the end of 20 was 1.7 million. Don't know how much of that they'll use or add to, but there is a bit of a reserve at the high school, which they did on purpose. Okay.
So for Chris, on the town free cash,
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing is fiscal year 20, 6.9.
Yep.
Fiscal year 21, we don't know, but we don't anticipate any surplus as a result of normal operating expenses and revenue.
That's right.
However, because of the 1 million revenue, the 6.9 would actually be everything else staying flat would be 7.9. That's what I'm
right.
hearing.
That's
Okay.
right. And technically, the way that there are rules around how the state looks at it, so I can't tell you, I can't sit here and say the balance is higher by $1 million, but from talking to Carrie, we feel like, we know the amount was paid. We know it's here. So
Yeah.
that's what I was looking at.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm sorry, I'm not really paying attention to my questions. Kathy, did you have a question?
Yes, yes.
Please.
Please explain E&D.
It's surplus at the school, so it's a fund balance. So it's excess and deficiency. So when they have their budget versus actual, to the extent it's over or under, it accumulates in that account. So they can use it for operations.
It's
Okay,
either a surplus or a deficit, basically.
right. Okay, is that good?
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question if I can't see you right now?
I do.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Question is that 1.7, is that just Concord share or is that shared with Carlisle?
No, that's a shared balance. That's a combined balance sheet of the school, right?
Okay.
Right,
So-
but Ray, when they use it to offset the expenses of the school, right? So they use it
Right.
total,
So
right?
So our share of that, so to speak, would be our share of the total bill.
I guess so, but
Yeah.
yeah, you can think of it that way, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions? Speak up if I can't, I only have you on a little side of my screen here. Okay, I'm gonna move on.
The only other comment is that E&D, I believe, represents, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that represents the top of their capacity to store money in the account. I believe that's close to 5%.
That's correct. That's right. That is
They have
5%.
a maximum legal amount that they can store as rainy day funds, and that is it.
That is it. Exactly right.
So,
Right.
Question? Do
Yes,
they have a minimum like we do of 5%?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go to, okay, so here's some math for us. So this was my proposal. So if you look, the FY21 tax base is the tax levy. So that's the number that we raised for 21 is 95.5 million. This is the math for figuring out the levy for FY22. You add to that 2.5% of the base, which is 2.4 million. You add in what the town has agreed to pay for debt service outside of Prop 2.5, which is 7.1 million. And that gives you 105 million. So that's the most, without going for a 2.5 override, that we can levy in FY22. So that's the math. And then you add to it what we think the tax will be on new growth. So any new properties or expansions or remodels. And Carrie estimates that at 800 grand, so 0.8. So if you add that in, there you have it. You have 105 million on the base, 800,000 on new growth, and we have a levy limit of 105.8. So typically, we have not taken all of that. We haven't taxed fully to the levy limit. We've done a reserve of a couple $1 million. So I assumed the same percentage that we did last year, which was, that's happened to be 4.35%. It works out to be, and that's actually, it ends up being on the, it's not, it's, the debt piece is out of that, but so the math's a little bit funky, but it works out to be 4.3 million. So the proposed levy, if we were to keep the limit reserve at the 4.3 million, would be 101.5 million. So if we don't, that if you, the more you use, and we'll show you a model of how we can play with this and show you how the math works, the more we use of that levy, or the less we keep of the 4.3 million, that's increasing taxes. Okay, so if we keep to the same formula we used last year, we'd be raising taxes of 101.5 million versus the FY21 levy of 98.1. So an increase in taxes, property taxes of 3.4 million, or around 3%. I'll pause there. Are there questions on that?
How does the 4.35, is that in our policy, or where does that?
It's
come
just
from?
math. No, it's no policy. It's just that we've always been somewhere around between 4 and 5%. So there's no policy. It just was the percentage we ended up at last year. You can
So
move
it's
it
just a
around.
historical tradition, precedence?
I don't know.
I'd like to comment on that. I don't believe that we have in prior years treated our excess levy capacity as something that we are, using as a benchmark for what we're trying to conserve. What we've done is we've tried to apportion our guideline spending and then see how much we may be digging into our excess levy capacity. In prior years, we've absolutely gone into our excess capacity. Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the last several years, we have not had a policy like this where we're trying to maintain either the level or the percentage of levy capacity. We've just looked at the levy capacity as a variable and decided whether or not to, cut into it or not cut into it as conditions require. Correct me if I'm wrong. No, I guess am I smoking my socks here? We've had spreadsheets where we've showed how far into the excess levy we are cutting as we make up our minds on our targets.
I'm not trying to say you can't move it. I'm just trying to come up with a number. So
Yeah, I know, but all I'm saying, Chris, is that it is a way to get to a number, but it's not something we've used as a metric other than to look at, gee, we don't want to go any deeper than that, or we don't want to go any higher in terms of total taxation. Like this is saying we're going to tax at 3.4 or 3.16 for, existing properties or something. We're looking at that bottom line and less at what the excess levy capacity behavior, what's happening with the excess levy capacity. That's all. That's been my experience anyway.
Dean, can you recall if the bond rating agencies look at what your levy limit reserve is? Do they take that into consideration, or maybe Carrie, you might know?
Yes, they absolutely do take that into consideration.
So I think that's played into our decision not to go right up to the limit, which, by the way, some towns do as a way to enforce some fiscal constraint, because if you're at the limit and you try to exceed it, you have to do a townwide override vote.
Yes.
So
Right.
we have chosen, we prefer to keep a margin, which I think is part of our AAA bond rating.
So
I'm not disagreeing with that. I just don't know that we've used it as a measure of how to get to a guideline number. We've looked at it, but it's not a goal to maintain some similarity to what we had the previous year. We've thought about it, but the charts show that we were digging into it for several years. Even though we had a lot of excess capacity, we dug into it for several years because those are choices we made.
So two questions, I guess, as a new bit of a newcomer. So one is, what is our current total capacity, levy capacity? And then the second question is, theoretically, it sounds as if we could, I hear what you're saying, Dean, that traditionally we've set the guideline and then kind of whatever's left over has been excess, has been limit reserve, right?
And sometimes it's not left over. We're actually taxing
understand.
in excess of, yeah,
Right, so you're drawing it down. So the
yeah.
question is, how much is in the balance, number one?
Yep.
And then number two, theoretically, it does sound like this year, if we wanted to tighten our belts, one could say that actually we're gonna work a little bit backwards. Instead of putting in 4.3, put in 7.7, so that in essence, you're flat in terms of comparison to the fiscal year 21 levy, 98.1, right? I mean, that could be another approach. I'm trying to understand what our options here are.
You can go all the way up to the 105.8, right? So but what's going to
You could
happen
go
is-
past
No, I don't know
105.8
what-
because we have so much capacity.
But I'm
No,
going in the
that's
other
right.
direction. I'm asking in the other direction.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
okay.
You could increase the capacity as well. Absolutely. You can go either way.
So how
Right.
much is the capacity right now?
It's
So-
around $4 million.
So
I know.
I have a question about this 3.16% increase. This is my first year. Inflation seems low. This seems high to me
Mm-hmm.
in these economic times to be asking people to come up with a 3% increase. Is that usual?
That's not what hits the tax bill. We'll talk about that in 1 second, but it is an increase in the levy.
Chris, did you say there's only $4 million currently in the reserve?
It's not a real reserve, right? It's the amount of what you can levy versus what we have levied. So it's math, right? So the difference between, let's see, 105.8 and it's the 4.3 million, right? It's not a real reserve. It's just math.
Oh, so when we say we dig into the reserve, there's no real reserve digging
No.
into?
No, it's just math.
I thought there was a reserve that we could
No.
dig into.
I wish.
So anything above 105.8, we'd have to go and get an override on the 2.5%.
No.
No,
No,
A 105.8, yes,
Can
yeah,
I-
105.8.
Can I try for a minute? I think the 3.4 million is the amount available to us because the levy is increasing. So that is the amount that's available to us if we keep the 4.35% headroom in the levy limit. If we do that every year as the budget goes up and as the levy limit goes up, if we keep the 4.35% headroom there, it gives us 3.4 million available for FY22. Does that help at all?
No, see, I'm still trying to understand the fiscal year 21 levy, 98.1.
Yep.
How that compares to the 95.5. I guess here's where I'm having difficulty. And if I'm the only one, we'll just move off this topic.
Well,
I'm
it's
just
7
trying to-
o'clock anyway, so we have to adjourn.
I'll tell you what, I'll take it offline with Carrie to better understand it, but I'll do that.
we're gonna have to come back to this after
We have to come back
after we have
anyway.
the other sections. So
Me
we'll
too.
be back.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So we'll be back on property tax. So I will take a motion to adjourn right now for the guideline subcommittee.
Good. I move.
So moved.
Okay, I have a move in a second.
Second.
I'll do roll call. So Chris Reynolds, yes. Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Greg Gorello,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
John Hickling,
Yes.
Dick Jameson,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
Yes.
Bill Swain,
Yes.
Ray Andrews,
Yes.
Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll.
Yes.
I think I got everybody. And that's good. Okay. So we just stay on, is that?
Yeah, but I've got to call the regular FinCom
Okay.
meeting to order. So it is 7 o'clock. I am calling the regular Finance Committee meeting to order. I have to announce that it's a Zoom meeting. We're being recorded. We're being broadcast I'm going to start with roll. I'm Mary Hartman, the chair. Going to go around the screen. If you just say here, I'd appreciate that. Chris?
Here?
Parashar?
Here.
Kathy Corculo? You're muted, Kathy.
No, I'm not here.
Here, okay, I didn't hear you, sorry. Dean?
Here.
Dee?
Here.
Brian?
Here.
Phil?
Yes. Here.
Ray?
Here.
Lois?
Here.
Dick?
Here.
John?
Here.
Andrea?
Here.
Good. Okay, before we start with our first presenter, I don't have any minutes available, so we can jump right over that. I just want to make a comment that I was doing some research and I was looking at the minutes of meetings that we had 2 years ago, I think, when we were doing the guideline. And there was a meeting held in November and it got out at 10:23. And then there was a meeting held a week later in November and it got out at 10:08 or something like that. So I just wanted to remind you of the fact that these meetings can be long. Okay, so we've got two really good presentations tonight on topics that are important to us and important to the finance future of Concord. And then we've got to reconvene for our guideline meeting. So we're going to be here for a while. And I just wanted to set that expectation with people. Our first presentation is the middle school committee. And I'm wondering, do we have our crew here? Chris?
Yeah, we've got, I think, Charles Parker, Don Goriello, Kristen Olson, Pat Nelson, and Peter Martini. I assume they should all be admitted?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate this coming on short notice. I see Dawn. There you are, Dawn. I'm gonna hand this over to you, Dawn, but I'd like to suggest that we hold any questions from the Finance Committee until the end of the presentation, if that's all right with you, because we have an hour allocated and I'm hoping that it's a half an hour presentation and hopefully a half an hour of Q&A. So is that okay with you?
That's excellent. That
Great.
works for us. And was it Chris who's letting folks in? Hi, Pat, I see her. I'm wondering if anyone from Hill International, there were a couple guys, Peter, Duckling, and Ian, if any of them show up. Oh, I see Peter. Excellent. I just wanted to make sure that, hey, Peter, I know Kristen, I saw her on. So I'll introduce everyone quickly and just say hello. I'm Dawn Guariello. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Concord Middle School Building Committee. Pat Nelson, a new co-chair alongside of me. Folks may know Pat. She is obviously the Concord Children's Center, Pat Nelson. And just so everyone knows, Tim Holt, who was my former co-chair, an excellent leader, had to unfortunately step down for non-COVID medical reasons. So of course, health always comes first and we fully support him and are thankful for everything he's done until now. So just so everyone knows, that's happened since the restart. He kind of helped us get restarted and then let Lori and I know, Dr. Hunter and I know that he needed to step down because of medical reasons. So we obviously wish him well and just want you to make everyone aware. So at the last building committee meeting, Pat Nelson was voted in as co-chair. She served previously as vice chair. So it made sense that she could step into that role and we're so thankful that she did. So just want to let you know the new leadership, everything else is pretty much the same. We still have SMMA, Kristen Olson with us. She will do the majority of the presentation, just so you know. She's our designer. We have Peter Martini from Hill International, and we have Duckling and Ian Parks. I don't know if they're here or on, but they work alongside Peter as our owner's project manager, also known as an OPM. So they are our team tonight, and thank you for asking us, Mary, to join your committee and to speak with you all and give you an update on where we are. So just so everyone knows, obviously you're well aware, we started this project back in 2019, and we took off from the starting line, right? Recognizing that time is of the essence, construction costs are going up, let's get this project underway, it's very much needed. And we hit the ground running with SMMA and Hill. And then of course, last spring, as we were sort of getting into the details of the feasibility study, COVID hit. And we had a couple meetings remotely, but of course, back then, everyone kind of didn't know where we were with things, just as far as became a critical point in the project to get community buy-in and community input. And this was before everyone was sort of Zoom savvy and everything. And amongst the leadership, and also recognizing that Dr. Hunter and her team and Justin, the principal at the middle school, needed to focus on reopening the schools this fall, it made sense for us to pause. And we went to the select board and asked if that would be okay, and they granted that to us. So we kind of paused through the summer and fall and then picked back up early December. And just so everyone knows, we're sort of, where we left it was in a place where we had an ideal building and we had a cost associated to it. It was a little more than what we wanted to spend as far as budget goes. So we are regrouping, resizing, reassessing, and pretty much getting back into the feasibility to nail down the size of the building that will fit within our budget. And what that means is Kristen and her team, of course, with Hill alongside of them as our representative as the owner's project manager, will bring us a building size that will work educationally, support the educational plan that Dr. Hunter and her team has put together. If anyone's been listening in on the school committee, that's been a topic of discussion and approval lately. And the building will support that educational plan and hopefully be super flexible for the next 50 years. So that's kind of where we are. And that's Kristen's going to give you the quick presentation she did to the entire building committee, which I know a few of you were part of. God, was that last week or the week before? I'm in a time warp. Anyway, whenever our last meeting was, Kristen did a great job of recapping our goals, recapping where we are, where we're going, and what the next few months, which are critical to the project, will be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, unless Dr. Hunter or Pat has anything to say. I don't know if you guys have anything to add, or I just wanted to give a quick who we are, where we are, and then let Kristen do her thing. But Dr. Hunter, Pat, anything?
We're just glad to be here and give you an update and then talk through your questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Okay, so with that, Kristen, does she have the ability to share her presentation, or does someone have it queued up? Perfect. Thanks. I will mute myself and hand it over to you, Kristen.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for inviting us. As Dawn mentioned, this is the basically the presentation that was given to the entirety of the building committee with some modifications, a few updates that happened in the few weeks. We've folded them into the presentation. So the agenda for this evening, just a recap of the goals, the charge for the 2021 feasibility study. We wanted to emphasize some critical information and decision points, talk about cost drivers and next steps. So our project goals recap was really that we're really working to stay within that $100 million project cost limit. That's what Dawn was mentioning in the introduction, is that in the springtime, we looked at a lot of options and a lot of costs, and it was landing over that. And so we're regrouping in this effort to really focus on that 100 million and meeting the educational goals of the facility and the community's priorities as well. So that means roughly translated into an $80 million construction cost. That's using a 25% project soft cost multiplier. We are looking to consolidate the Peabody and Sanborn Middle Schools on the Sanborn Middle School site. It'll be a great opportunity to have the two together. The design enrollment has been set at 700 students in grades 6 through 8. The team teaching model is a very, very large priority that we might speak to a little bit later. We are looking at the consideration of sizing the gym for more than just the middle school use, as we know that some community entities use the gymnasium as well. So we're collecting information from them to see what that means for sizing the gymnasium. Similarly, the auditorium is what we're looking at as well. We know the existing Sanborn has an auditorium, the Peabody has the forum, and we know those are very, very important pieces to the existing schools. And so we're looking at what that means for the new project. And then, of course, the sustainability goal of being net zero ready at a minimum and considering a push toward ultra low energy design. But primarily, we're really looking at that overarching goal of creating that single next generation learning facility for the students, middle school students in Concord. So we started out with this three-legged stool concept because, as mentioned, we had a lot of scope in the prior study, and then it resulted in higher cost, and so we really wanted to lay out that we frequently refer back to this three-legged stool. When you increase the budget, you can increase quality. The goal is to keep all of the legs in proportion. So we just reviewed with the building committee members that if you influence one of those legs, then it impacts the other legs. And you can very frequently control two, but then the third is very directly impacted. So if you were to cut the schedule in half, then you can't expect the other legs to not change. Similarly, if you're expecting high quality, then that's going to influence your budget and so on. So we just wanted to talk about that briefly with the committee. And then there are various iterations of the same stool with scope, quality, and schedule. This slide speaks to what the typical critical information and decisions are in each of the two phases that we're on contract for. We're in the feasibility study right now, which is the left-hand side, and then the schematic design would follow. We put this slide forward because we were getting a lot of questions about when certain decisions need to be made, and can we wait until the end of the feasibility to make the decision about the gymnasium size or whether an auditorium is included or not. And really, this slide is to emphasize that we really do need to define that ed plan and enrollment and the program. And that's where auditorium and gym come into play. Site constraints and existing conditions are very important. Basic concepts around building materials and massing, sustainability goals, and so on. In schematic design, however, that's when you would go into selecting your building systems. So we had some questions about what decisions can come later, but we also have some members of the committee who are eager to make those schematic design decisions earlier. So we kind of wanted to really make that clear what decisions and information come into play in which phase.
Kristen, can I interrupt for 1 second? And I'm sorry to do this to you. There were a couple questions about some of the acronyms. So I just wanted to define them for folks that aren't in the industry and may not know what an EUI is, for example. So one is massing, and massing is essentially how tall the building is or how the different form takes shape in a third dimension. So a massing decision would speak to how tall the building is, how many stories it is, that sort of thing. So an EUI is an energy use intensity, and that's basically an indicator of the energy efficiency of a building's design and operations. FF&E, down on the bottom on the left in feasibility, is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So that's all, it's products in the building that we need to, we need desks and chairs and projectors to run a school. But what that is it's separated out, and usually under a different budget number. For, if you imagine a built building, if you can pick it up and flip it over and shake everything, whatever falls out is FF&E usually. And so it's like loose furniture, right? Things that aren't like attached to the wall. I mean, a projector might be, but for the most part, things that are loose and, required to run a building. AV is audiovisual. LCCA is on the right under MEPs. That's a life cycle cost analysis. That's a method for assessing the total cost of facility ownership. So it takes into account everything from maintenance, initial costs, the cost to actually run the systems. So that's a LCCA, so life cycle cost analysis. There's a PV at the bottom strategy. Those are photovoltaics. So that's the conversion of, sunlight into electricity, essentially. So those are strategies to be able to have an array on the roof over parking, et cetera. And then lastly, it's not on here, but it was asked of us, the OPM, which is the owner's project manager, which is Hill International, who Peter Martini, who I introduced. And they basically serve as our management team. They are our eyes and ears. They're our representatives as a project management team. So I'm sorry to shift gears on you, Kristen, but I'm recognizing that a lot of these acronyms are on there, and I just want to make sure everyone understood what we're saying when we use some of these. So if there's something that someone doesn't understand, an acronym or a description of something, please just ask and we'll explain it. And, just we assume, and sometimes it's hard because we live in a world of acronyms. So Kristen's laughing because she knows.
Yeah.
So, okay. Sorry, Kristen, keep going.
No, thank you, Don. And for that matter, I would, even though we're holding questions till the end, if I am moving off of a slide too quickly, or there are, comprehension kind of questions, then definitely feel free to ask for a quick pause. So the education plan and enrollment are now set, and we have a high level of confidence in those. The site is a given. I think one of the big areas that we're working on in this feasibility study is that program and square footage. And just like in the three-legged stool example, more square footage means more cost. And so we really have to be very conscious of what the square footage is, make sure to use it efficiently and really get it right. No one wants an over-designed or under-designed size of their building. So we're working hard on that. Site constraints and conditions. During the first phase of the feasibility study, we did geotechnical investigations, hazmat survey. We looked at geoenvironmental and some other things. So it's really to assess the conditions of the site and make sure that we know the parameters within which we're working. So those are pretty much givens. Site and building plans, those will come after we have our program and square footage set. Don, I think, reviewed the materials and massing. And then we're working with the sustainability subcommittee a lot on this all electric and EUI range goals in particular. So then budget, it's extremely important to set the budget in feasibility study phase. Just the budget goals, it won't be fixed typically until you're at the end of schematic design and you have that final estimate. So a preliminary estimate always comes out of feasibility study, but we do need a budget to work toward. And so we're using that $100 million project cost. Construction delivery method, I should elaborate maybe, is you have two options in public procurement, and that is to use construction manager at risk or design bid build. They're frequently referred to by Mass General Laws, Chapter 149 and Chapter 149A. And those are just different types of construction delivery methods that we'd be evaluating with the building committee. So in terms of project cost drivers, I think I spoke to it a little bit already, but there are some fixed costs that we can't control and there are costs that we can control. Demolition costs, those are pretty much a fixed cost per square foot. They're pretty uniform across any project, and we know that we're building on the existing Sanborn site, and the Sanborn building will need to be demolished at the end. So that's a given. Abatement pre-demolition must occur in order for demolition to occur. For this particular project, we know that there's a septic system that's existing. For the new school, it will have to be replaced. And so that's also a non-negotiable cost that we can't control, or anything related to code compliance. Code drives certain costs and decisions and project components. And then escalation, I have it under costs we can't control because we don't really, we put it in an estimate and we put a point in time in for escalation, but those are market driven factors. And so they kind of just need to be evaluated in an ongoing basis through cost estimating. What we can control though is that building square footage, building engineering systems. There are different types, and different types have different costs associated with them. And our engineering team will work with your group, the facilities management team and so on, to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the engineering systems. Site program, there are a lot of options that can be considered for that. Building materials, they're high end and high, medium, and low end materials. We build buildings for 50 years and on. So you're definitely going to get a high quality building that'll last for many generations. And within that, there's still a lot of gradient. Construction delivery method does influence cost. CM at risk is a higher cost due to the construction manager involvement earlier on. So there's typically a premium for that. And then sustainability, depending on what your goal is, that can be a cost influencer. Here at the bottom, we just wanted to emphasize, while we're weighing all of these options and gathering information from the subcommittees, the community, and so on, we need to make sure that we're capturing really what's the minimum requirement, what's really needed to make this that 21st century educational facility that Concord's proud of, and then what are those stretch goals, what would take it above and beyond. So we need to make sure that we're keeping those in mind in the appropriate categories while we're striving to meet our budget. So we have numerous groups that we're meeting with over the course of the next 4 months. One is the educational leadership team. Lori and her team, we've been working with Justin, the educators, a lot as they develop their educational plan. The educational plan really focuses on how teaching is performed in the building, and it gives us information on group sizes and collaboration and just how those educators work in the building, and some information on class sizes and staffing and educational goals. They will help us to inform the educational use of the gymnasium and auditorium and inform the site program in terms of how the middle school uses it. At a point down the road, after we've worked through the ed plan and translate that into space, we'll be working with the educational leadership team to confirm that our space summary, which is just the translation of the educational spaces into square footage, that does in fact reflect their goals. And we'll work with the educational team to then talk to adjacencies and so on. Concurrently, we're working with the design subcommittee, who's going to be helping us with making sure we have the community use all accounted for, reviewing comprehensively from a design standpoint what our building massing and materials goals are. The design subcommittee will review the space summary after we've had that first pass and make sure that it meets the educators' requirements. We'll be bringing it forward to the design subcommittee for their review and questioning. And the design subcommittee will then be the group who recommends it to the SBC for approval. After that point in time, the design subcommittee will be our primary reviewer of the site and building concepts, which are just the sketches and plans that translate that into shape. The sustainability subcommittee will help us to make sure we're tracking all of the applicable town policies and goals, as well as any project goals specifically, and we'll work to define those minimum and above minimum sustainability goals. Town Finance Committee, here we have, we've made sure to include your committee in this process, as we expect some information and input on confirming the construction delivery method, as that is a contractual finance bearing item. We'll be able to review with you if there are any other funding sources that come into play. At this time, we're assuming there are none. We're assuming that that $100 million cost limit is comprehensive for the project. And then confirming the Peabody School and site and project cost overall. We have a small management team that was designated early on, and basically we do just administrative check-ins. Here's the owner's project manager acronym that you were probably finding in there. And they just help us by providing contact information and making sure that we're on track and moving along well with all of our milestones. The finance subcommittee is a subcommittee that was raised at the building committee because we hadn't met in some time. And I believe that we're going to be revisiting the finance subcommittee and their role at our next building committee meeting. But their charge was to keep an eye on the analysis of building costs and project budget. And then communication, oh, yeah.
Sorry, Kristen, I just wanted to point out Tim Holt was the chair of that, and with his departure, we're discussing the reallocation of people. So that's why it's coming up at the next meeting, just so everyone knows.
Mhm. And communications subcommittee, I've also been working with the communications subcommittee to make sure that we have all of the notices and information going out to the community. So in terms of collecting community input, we have small working groups and meetings and interviews and programming sessions that we're scheduling based on what we need. And then sometimes we'll learn in one of those meetings or in other correspondence that something else is required. So as we go, we just continue to gather information in these different small group meetings. And then we also have 4 general update sessions for larger community forums planned. The first one being next week, Monday. And those are organized, and we can talk more about this at the schedule slide, but the first one's really that kickoff. The second will be coming back to the community after that program, ed plan, space summary are all kind of settled a little bit. And then the third will be after the building concepts have been developed, and the fourth is the summary. So in terms of process, we have this graphic here where we'll always be coming to any of the subcommittees, community, the building committee with our information and our ideas. We'll get feedback and then respond to that and evolve to the next point in time. So, and then after we've gone through a full cycle and have buy-in from all of the stakeholder groups, we'll come to the community and then also bring that information forward for public input and community feedback. And that then comes to the CMSBC finally for decision. And then here we're close to the end. This is kind of showing our timeline in bigger buckets, so that this is what I've been speaking to over the course of the slides, is that we're in this space summary and project requirements phase right now over the course of these 2 months. Lots of small meetings and interviews and working group sessions here. Here are our building committee meetings outlined and our community forums. After we get the project requirements set, we'll move into that concept development where we're putting pen to paper. And then finally, we'll be in developing the report. Just another visual, these have some of the smaller working groups reflected, where we have the leadership team, the design subcommittee, sustainability subcommittee, communication subcommittee. So these are just some of showing over the course of any month when we're meeting with whom, because we know it's a lot and it's a lot to keep track of. So we're trying to consolidate it in one calendar for everyone. And again, these are just capturing the major decisions that in the end of, I have to move a window here. At the end of January, we'll be seeing that we have a draft space summary to recommend to the design subcommittee. And then the design subcommittee will take it from there, hopefully recommending a final version to the building committee, and then again passing along through those milestones discussed. So just in summary, again, our project goals recap, same as slide 1, and that would conclude the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see everyone for conversation purposes, but I'm happy to pull anything back up if there are questions specific to a slide.
Thank you. That was great. That was a great grounding. Don, is there anyone else that you want to invite to say something, or should we open it up to Q&A from the Finance Committee?
I'll offer to Peter if he wants to say anything as our owner's project manager. I think Lori and Pat, I offered to say a few things. Peter, if you don't have anything, we can go straight to questions and answers. If you just want to say hi.
That's fine. Go ahead to the questions and answers. I just wanted to say that we're pleased so far, as you can tell, with the progress that's been made, and that the scheduling that is coming up pretty soon on this, and the team's working really well together. So I just want to throw that out there, and we're moving ahead. And
Great.
good to be here.
Thank you.
Glad-
Yep, so Q&A, Mary.
glad to have you here. Okay, I'll open it up to the Finance Committee. Anybody on the Finance Committee have any questions? Parashar.
I had two questions, and I have not been following the details
Yep.
of the school committee and other presentations, so I apologize. One is around the enrollment size, 700 students. You've talked about the building being feasible for 50 years. I think I heard 30, 40 years, right? I'm kind of curious, what's the plus or minus around school enrollment over that 30, 40, 50-year window? So 700, the expected, and it's going to stay flat. Do you think it's declining? A little bit of just color there, I think, would be helpful. And the second has to do with the financial implications of the construction delivery method. You talked about one method being slightly higher costs. And again, I'm just trying to get a sense financially, is it 5% higher, 10%? And what are some of the things we can do to control that risk, depending on whichever method we go to?
Lori, do you want to take the enrollment? I know we just recently received a new report, right? And then Kristen and Peter, if you guys want to tag team the construction delivery method after Lori.
Sure. So we've been doing different layers of number crunching here to try to come up with a number that would be a solid target so that we could absorb some growth, but not overbuild, right? That's the goal. So our current enrollment's at 683, something very close to that. When we look at our enrollments in the elementary schools, they're down a bit from that. So we knew we'd have some decline, at least on paper right now, if the same number of kids were to get up to the middle school. And we also have recent NESDEC projections. We work with the New England Development Council. It's a partnership that we have every year. We're members, and they provide that to districts on regular basis. And they look at census counts, they look at building growth, they look at new housing starts, they look at available land, they look at the bylaws in such of the town for what might not be available but could become available, or in our case, sometimes not. So they do that level of analysis. So we just got that projection as well. They actually had us projected out at a pretty flat level at the middle school for the next 10 years with some decline after that. So in moderate decline. So I'd say maybe down to the 660 range. So when we do the math, based on how we're proposing to put the teams in classrooms together, we'd be at about 19 kids per class, which is admittedly a really, really great instructional environment, but it also gives us room to go above what we think we will open at, so that we could absorb that growth and end up with class sizes of 22. And overall, the building can handle that and get to the 700 number, even a little bit beyond. So what we can't factor in is some of the other unpredictable pieces. We've been trying to study private school enrollments. We do have a good number of middle school kids who live in Concord, who go to even Concord's own private schools, trying to take our little crystal ball to see if a new building might draw them back. Those kinds of things we're trying to buffer in as well. So the 700 proved to be a pretty comfortable number because it allows for that growth, but looks like we wouldn't be overbuilding. So it's a number we're constantly coming back and forth from at every level of the planning process, whether it's the classroom space or the common spaces like cafeteria and things like that. So
that's great, and I appreciate the additional color, Lori. I'm kind of curious. I know there's a number of different committees and groups in Concord that want to increase affordable housing, bring in more multifamily dwelling units, et cetera. I'm curious, have they had any input, or have they come to you with input in terms of, hey, if we're successful, here's kind of what we're hoping, or is it just too far out in advance and too unknown to go with something that might be a little bit more customized based on a little bit more local sense of what might happen?
So there hasn't been a formal input process with them. We do have a growing list of organizations in town to be sure that we connect with. And I know we're well represented there with one of the school committee members. So we touched on it, I would say, during the educational plan discussion. I think it's a great idea to reach out to the housing groups in town and talk on what they have for goals and how that might have impact here.
And your second question, Parashar, was?
Oh, the second one was around the construction delivery method, right? I think there was a mention that if you have contractor at risk, it might be higher costs. I'm kind of curious, is it 5%, 10? The alternative, if we try to do it ourselves, there's obviously risk around that, and just what your thoughts are. And in terms of, the 100 million estimate that you've got in place, is that envisioning going with the construction at risk, if that's the proper term, or is it envisioning a total and then still trying to figure out which delivery method to use?
The delivery method, as far as the cost goes, there's been studies done on it, and they've been challenged, and there's critics on both sides. There's a rough rule of thumb as a 5% dollar amount for construction, and what that entails, and it depends on the project. What that entails, if you're bringing a contractor on early, number one, there's services they provide for pre-construction, which adds to the cost. And also it can be argued that even though they're going out and churning the competitive waters in the subcontractor market, you're losing a little bit of that competition in the general contractor market. Typically, and we try not to really recommend one or the other, just the pluses and minuses. On this particular job, on a job where you'd bring in a contractor early, and those are the jobs that have a little bit more cost. If it's a very difficult site, maybe if there's difficult site access and traffic, if it's an occupied school, I live in the town of Arlington, and the high school is being done in 6 different phases, and the students are remaining on site. So there's a lot of phasing that has to be done there. And there's some extreme site conditions there and elevations. A job like that lends itself well to a 149A, which is bringing a contractor in early. On this particular job, it really lends itself to getting 100% plans done and going out into the market. But I hesitate to give a percent, but it is less money, and I think Don, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know which way we had the budget in now.
We assumed a design bid build, Kristen,
Right, okay.
yes?
So it's been designed with that savings.
Yes. And just so everyone knows, that's market driven. Right now, we're seeing really competitive design bid build projects that we weren't seeing in the market years ago. And I see Kristen nodding her head. I'm seeing it in my office. She's seeing it. I assume, Hill, you're seeing it as well. We've had these conversations. So the decision hasn't been made. I think it's going to be presented. Is it the next building committee or 2 meetings from now? It's upcoming because it does become a critical fork in the road as far as decision making, because it does affect how the project is estimated. So to be determined in fairly short order, but I would agree that 5-ish to 10-ish I've seen in that range, somewhere between there. And that part of it is just competitive nature, and they still have to do filed subbids. There are certain filed subbid laws and contractors that bid on that particular scope of work, but anything outside of that, the construction manager can, competitively ask people they know or relationships they have and bring in contractors, that they are under their umbrella. So it's just a couple different ways to deliver the project, but I would say it's fair to say that it does tend to cost a little bit more upfront for CM at risk, 149A, but that sometimes in design bid build, you're going to have change orders that at the end of the day, and no one's ever done this because there's no way to control it, but that you could call it equal at the end of the project. So yeah.
I would include those, so the 100 million though you're envisioning including either, that's the price either way is what you're envisioning.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a broad question, a very overview. I was very, very encouraged to hear you say the 100 million was your limit. But I'm wondering, and I'm assuming that includes any oversized auditorium or gymnasium. Is that a correct assumption?
That is our goal. That is our goal. So we're still trying to hone in on what that size of gym and what that size of auditorium or performance space, whatever you want to call it, because I think we have a few alternatives, a black box theater, a mid-size auditorium, and a larger auditorium. We're still trying to, that's one of the next major steps for the design subcommittee. So the goal will, I'm sorry, Mary, but the goal will be to, whatever those decisions are, to have those included in the 100 million if we can.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that they're going to need to be trade-offs made, right? With the ed plan being the primary goal. In other words, it is a school after all, right? So the ed plan is the primary goal, and then other things might be nice to have. What is the process? Because I remember when I went to your December 10th meeting, it looked like the design subcommittee was going to be the committee where these trade-offs were made. And now I'm hearing it might be the finance subcommittee where the trade-offs are made. So what's the process to actually make these trade-offs so that we come in at the aspirational goal of the 100 million?
At the end of the day, it'll be the design subcommittee that makes the recommendation to the greater building committee. You heard that correct. The finance committee, certainly subcommittee. Honestly, they're, correct me if I'm wrong, team, but they're charged with making sure that our spending and our and where we are with what we've been allotted. And in this case, we approved 1.5 million for the contracts for this phase of the project to make sure that we are not overspending or not spending incorrectly, or so that's the charge of that group, to just make sure that the finances in that sense are kind of watched over. But as far as the cost of the project, they're in the know and they weigh in. A lot of the members are on both, or have potential to weigh in on either. But at the end of the day, it'll be the design subcommittee that makes the recommendation on.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And then I've got one more question. I remember Tim Holt made a comment at your December 10th meeting that I thought was great. He said that if the school was getting MSBA funding, they would be the overseers of the budget as it went forward, right? And because we're not getting MSBA funding, we don't have that financial oversight, if you will. So who will be the oversight to this when we start making decisions? And you mentioned the word change order earlier. When we start making decisions that move from the design to the actual choosing building materials or other cost related decisions that need to be made, what's the process of oversight?
Okay, so
Hey, Don.
Stephen's
yeah,
here, Don.
Stephen,
Yeah, so-
absolutely.
Yeah, so I think, I guess, and MSBA oversight,
yep,
I think is primarily related to determining contributing and non-contributing expenses. So the MSBA has a list of things they're going to pay for, and then everything else they're not going to pay for. So the financial oversight of MSBA is, we will pay for an 8,000 square foot gymnasium. If you want to build a 10,000 square foot gymnasium, you're on the hook for that last 2,000 square feet. The financial oversight of the project is the domain of the building committee, the OPM, the architect, the project team. So I want to make sure we talk about oversight. It's the project finances are overseen by the committee and the consultant team and town staff and school staff. Reviewing invoices, signing invoices, doing all of that stuff. The MSBA oversight is really related to what they fund and what they don't.
I do understand that. I understand that they're just looking at what it qualifies according to our guidelines, right? But without them there to do that, who would be?
It's still the same. I mean, MSBA or not, no MSBA,
yep.
The committee or a subcommittee sometimes reviews invoices, meets with the contractors, looks at expenses, and the rigor is at that level. And then the paperwork gets sent off to MSBA, and then they just review it again for applicability, not for, did we pay for 100 sheets of drywall and only got 90 of them? I mean, it's not like that. It's that review is done at the local level. MSBA or no MSBA.
Okay, thank you. Brian, do you have a question?
Sorry about that. Thanks for the great presentation. I just want to make some clarifying questions. I have a couple clarifying questions. So the limit is 100 million. you've budgeted for an $80 million. So the remaining 20 million is sort of the buffer of unforeseen costs that could occur, or could you help me understand what the 20 remaining, what happens to the 20, or help me understand how you guys are thinking about that?
Great question.
Sure. So there's hard cost and soft cost. And if you put them in the two buckets, it'll be really clear. So hard costs are the cost of the materials and the manpower, the man hours to build the building. And then there's soft costs. We have to pay SMMA and Hill for their services. We have to pay for testing, whether it's geotechnical or whether it's concrete slump tests. Like you have to pay for all of those things. So soft costs are things that help design, like are contributing to the design of the building and or testing outside of the parameters of the actual construction of the building. And I don't know if Kristen and Peter have another description of that, but essentially the 80 million is the construction cost. That is hard costs, and that's how they're termed in the industry. And then there's soft costs, and that's everything on top of it is considered a soft cost.
No, well done. And in both of those buckets, there is an amount of money that's usually a contingency amount.
Correct. So the contingency is what's going to cover, Brian, to your point, thank you, Peter, is what's going to cover any unforeseen. And there are a few contingencies, and that's for another day, but yes.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And then the final question to Mary's point, where is the gym or a auditorium budgeted into that 80 million, or how does that square?
Yes, so again, there's the hard cost and the soft cost. So the soft cost is we're going to pay Sims and Hill to design and manage the design of it, but then the cost of the construction of it should fit into that 80 is our goal. Okay. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. It was just back to your point earlier. I think what you were trying to get at, Mary, is, and I think it's a very good point, is that the advantage, there are some disadvantages, but the advantage of being an MSBA project is that you have a third party who controls the purse strings. So it's not about approving invoices. It's the fact that there's tension over what you're going to spend on. And if you decide to spend on something that they will not fund, you have to come up with the money yourself. And I think that's part of what was the discussion that was going on with Tim Holt and others, was that internally they sought to use some of the same measures that MSBA uses to evaluate the project, because it was useful to sort of see what would be allowed and what isn't, in terms of bringing into question, what are we spending on, and what, if we weren't funding it 100% ourselves, we wouldn't have this money. And so I think it is a good tension that they were trying to instill within the project. So I think that's what your point was, Mary, and that's what we were talking about, Stephen, not approving invoices.
I think it's useful to point out, so the MSBA has their eligible costs and their ineligible costs. And the reason that they do that is so that they can fund more projects across the Commonwealth, right? Like they want to be fair. And so they've established these guidelines, these modules, right, that have guidelines for school construction. Perfect example, they do not fund, it's ineligible to have an auditorium in a middle school. They don't fund it. They fund it at the high school level, not the middle school level or elementary. So if Concord is an MSBA project and we decide we have to have an auditorium, they say, okay, great, but 100% of that cost, soft and hard costs, are on Concord, okay? So they don't care if you're spending, in some ways they do because they're funding it, but they don't care if you're spending $300 a square foot or $400 a square foot if it's within your budget. So you as a community and as a designer and an OPM are establishing a budget. They're kind of making sure it's not way out of whack, that you're not up at 800, for example, but they're not telling you you have to spend X. They're telling you we will reimburse up to X, and they have a number value. It's like $326 a square foot, or I'm forgetting exactly the number. no one can build at that cost, just so you know. So they reimburse that much. Everything above that. So if you're spending $500 a square foot for construction costs, hard costs that I just described, that's great. They don't care. But everything above the 326 is 100% on the town. Ineligible. Does that make sense? So in some ways they are controlling it in that they're saying this is all we're willing to give any given community, but they're not saying you can't spend $500 a square foot.
So to say that a little differently, they control their own purse strings, not the purse strings of the project. And so that's still ultimately under local control. And if the community wants to build the school that it wants to build for itself, if it was an MSBA project, you're going to get the same amount of money no matter what.
Right. And if you had unlimited resources, it wouldn't matter. But if you don't, it matters, right? They can fund up to 30 or 40% of a project. So
not here though.
80. They can fund up to 80.
Yeah. So no, I
not
we're not doing that here. I'm just saying it operates with, it gives leverage to certain things. So that's all I'm saying. I don't disagree with anything anybody else is saying, but
yeah, no, great point.
It takes some leverage out of the picture. I'm done.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're referring to the size of the gym or the auditorium or whatever it is, and you're talking about $100 million, the cost to build a middle school, how firm is that $100 million? It sounded like it was not so firm, that it would depend on whether the community wanted a bigger gym, in which case it's going to cost more money. How do you control that? How do you set the limit and say, this is all we're going to spend, and we'll do what we can within that amount of money?
I think sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's where we are. We're trying to determine
absolutely where we are.
We're trying to determine
I am
how
spending
much
3 hours a day on that question right now, trying to
That's
get
exactly
everything
where
we're
we are.
hoping for under the 100 million with Kristen and the design team and the design subcommittee. We're working really, really hard at that right now, because that has to be the goal. We all know that.
And I think, sorry, Stephen, just one quick point, Stephen. I was just going to say, if it's educationally supported, it will be within that. If it's something above and beyond because the community basketball league wants to be able to do it and they feel really strongly and they come out in full force and say, everyone we know is going to vote for this project because their kids play basketball and we need a bigger gym, then the 6,000 that the MSBA otherwise would have, under their guidelines. That's where, if it goes over, we're trying to get a flavor for how much the community will have an appetite for that. So if it's supported by the educational plan and it's part of the delivery of the curriculum, it will be within our budget. It's anything above and beyond that we need to get feedback on. And if the community isn't willing to support it, then I think if we're not able to fit it in there, that's one of the concessions that it's going to be a tough decision to have to make.
I'm hearing two different things right now. I'm hearing trying to get into the 100 million, but then if we have enough people that would support spending more and we can get them to come out in full force, then we'll spend more. So do we have a commitment to the 100 million? I think that's what we're asking for.
Yeah, Mary, can I answer that? Can I take a shot at that?
Please.
So I think, as Kristen said at the beginning of the presentation, and this is typical for all projects like this, the committee, if you've seen the middle school building committee or your observers, no, it's a big committee. So there's a lot of viewpoints and a lot of really smart people that are on it. And the meetings that I've been a part of have been really, really a lot of energy and a lot of attention to detail, which is really great for the town's people. But I think you start the project and everybody says, what is the ideal? If money were no object, what's the building we would really want? And we go out and we kind of do a high level design and a high level estimate. And then, as Kristen noted at the beginning of the presentation, oh, by the way, that's over the budget. So how do we design then to our building budget? And that's the process we are actively engaged in now through schematic design, And at the end of schematic design, we'll say, here is your $80 million building. But ultimately, the decisions on what building gets approved and goes to, that ultimately gets made by town meeting. And if 2/3 of town meeting decide they want that building, then it goes to the voters. And so if 2/3 of town meeting decide, even though we said we want an $80 million building, if an $82 million building will get us this other thing we really want, then it would be an $82 million building. And I'm not saying that, and I'm not advocating for that. I hope the committee's clear. I'm not advocating for that, and neither was Dawn in her comments. We're just laying out how this process unfolds in all communities in Massachusetts that have our form of government. Ultimately, a town meeting where this vote comes up can do that.
You're right. You're absolutely right. This will come up. This is going to be decided by the people at town meeting. That's for sure.
Sorry, Mary, but the committee is the middle school building committee its obligation is to deliver an $80 million building schematic design.
Great.
Okay. Can I just ask one follow-up question to that point to both Dawn and Stephen? The MSBA, it's the MSBA, correct?
Correct.
Do they, Dawn, when you said, okay, I don't know what the number was, I think you said 300 a square foot. When I think of what you're articulating, MSBA basically has a limit and then they don't go above that. Is that limit across the board, across the state, or does MSBA, are there certain criteria for each town and sort of the economic tax base of those towns? Does that impact the square footage that they're actually subsidizing? Because this sounds like it's going to get really complicated really fast. And going back to Christine's point about leverage, how much leverage they're actually going to they may actually have based on what they're willing to pay.
Well, I think so. When MSBA is involved in the project, the process is different. And not only, there are restrictions that MSBA imposes that, quite frankly, add cost and add time, not the least of which was waiting for MSBA to agree to fund the project. And so when I don't want to sort of have a narrative saying we don't want their money, so we're not following them. It's more, if you look at, you can make a business case for the Concord Middle School that doing it as a local project versus an MSBA project makes sense from a business case, because, Brian, to your point, there are square footage formulas, but as Dawn tried to articulate, there's also an analysis of building spaces, types of spaces, and they have kind of off the shelf, if you will. In fact, they have off the shelf school models that they will reimburse at a higher rate versus one that's kind of custom designed. It's almost like buying a car off the lot versus ordering it. And so it does get complicated, but the reality is your rate of reimbursement depends most likely on the affluence of the community. And so the 80% is an inner city school, and we'd be looking, I think, at Lori, I defer to you on this, but I thought it was less than 20%, like way less than 20%.
In the low 20s, at least for the high school, somewhere in there.
Okay, we're running out of
Sorry,
time.
one more thing, Mary. The cost per square foot, Brian, is the same, but the percentage of reimbursement would be different by community, if that helps answer your question.
Right, but we're not, okay. We've got a few more minutes. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then, because I see 2 hands up, but we've got other speakers waiting. So Dee, you want to go next? Go ahead.
Thanks. Different topic. I have 2 questions, but I'll try to consolidate them if I can figure out how. My first question is, what is the percent of the contingency?
Kristen, what are you carrying right now? It's high in feasibility and it drops as the drawings get more accurate.
12%.
What's the number? Your contingency percentage?
12%.
12 right now.
12%
in feasibility.
Okay. And is it trending up, trending down, or how are you going to calculate that?
As the design documents become more refined and developed, the contingency is reduced. So you kind of absorb it or reduce as you go along.
So your contingency, though, is, if I understood correctly, that is going to take care of the project cost drivers, which are those fixed costs, which would be the demolition.
You know, we should elaborate, Don. There are the multiple types of contingencies, and I'm speaking to the design contingency. So right now, the design contingency covers any unknowns from the design process because we're working on a very high level right now. So that's the design contingency. There's
And
also
the
an,
design, let me just interrupt for a second. The design contingency is based on what value? Is it 80 million? Is it 100 million or to be determined?
it's based on 80 million.
Yeah, what's
80
being
million,
designed.
okay,
It's on the construction cost.
okay. And then you have other contingencies, like the fixed cost removal, the demolition. Is that a different contingency?
There's design, owner, and construction contingency typically.
Design, owner, and construction.
So
Okay.
design is what Kristen was describing. There's a construction contingency that would cover costs of unknown. You find, harmful products in the ground when you're digging that you didn't know were there, for example. And then there's owner contingency that you can choose to change something in construction because the, owner decisions. So there are three contingencies.
So the construction one would include the demolition?
The cost of the project includes the demolition. So it's not covered under contingency.
So I misunderstood what was said earlier, that those fixed costs for the project demolition work were assigned a contingency as part of a contingency.
Oh, the fixed costs are out of our control, as in that 80 million construction costs. You immediately take out the demolition costs and you immediately take out abatement. So
You take that out of the 80 million.
Correct. They're part
We're
of the
taking that-
construction. Yeah.
That's part of the construction costs, not a contingency
Yes.
associated
Correct.
with it.
That's
Okay.
correct. It'll be a line item cost.
Okay, all right. So I took up enough time. I'll defer my other question to Dean, I guess was the other person?
Yes.
I am. I want to back up a little bit. We've spent a lot of time talking about a number that Kristen put on the presentation. And by the way, Kristen, thank you. It's a fantastic job. And you should promote that presentation elsewhere. The select board would love to see it, I think. But the number that's now pegged on everybody in everybody's mind is 100 million. When we went to town meeting and asked for $1.5 million to do the feasibility and the schematic design, we were given a range of 80 to 100. And now we're at the absolute top of the range. And that's the fixed number in the universe, which is the top of the range. I guess I would suggest we think about the middle of the range, which is 90, not because what was represented at town meeting was 80 to 100. So let's look for 90 rather than let's see what we can squeeze into 100. That's my first point. Okay. And town meeting approved this project on that presentation and on that information. So I think we need to be honest about what we're doing rather than just say, oh, look, that was a number, let's go for the top. So I've been assigned to this committee as the observer. And so I'm a little bit more in the details than others, and I'm not going to dive in. Some of the members here have dived in much deeper than I want to do. But I do have some really fundamental questions about the committee and the restart. When we restarted in December, we had a nice gentleman named Mike who gave us a great Gantt chart of the entire sweep of the project. And there were two dates that are important to me. One was the completion date for the feasibility study, which was in mid-March. And the second important date was we're going to be in the school on 9/1 of 2025. We came back 1 month later, and in that month, there was a lot of churn. The subcommittees were told not to meet. Tim dropped back, and for reasons that are very real, he dropped back, and we have new management of the entire committee. We have new committee heads. And we have some churn at Hill. So we have Mike is off the case, and he's not managing the whole sweep of the project with his lovely Gantt chart. We come back on January 7th, and the one item that was due on March 15th in his very large Gantt chart is now out in May. So we've lost 2 months. In 1 month, we've lost 2 months. And in that meeting, we have new people from Hill. We don't see a new Gantt chart. Nobody says in that meeting, oh, are we okay with opening the school doors on 11/1 now because we just lost 2 months? So I'm a little concerned. And Peter, I'd like you to speak to that because I need to feel that the entire project is being managed in a way where people are being made aware that when we lose 2 months, it's real. And change in staff, I can understand. We've had COVID. It's really been bad. You may have to, assign people to other projects to just keep the balls all in the air. But that's hurt us as a town because now we've just lost 2 months on the project. And it wasn't even mentioned in the January 7th meeting. There was no mention of the loss of time. So I'd like you to address that, Peter, if you could.
First, I'm going to turn over that question maybe to Steve and Dawn. But as far as the Hill end goes, we haven't lost any charts. We haven't lost any time. We haven't lost any semblance on the project. We're moving forward. We put a schedule together that at the restart that mirrored what the schedule was prior to the pause. And that was the schedule that was put together. Since that time, we've been working on the schedule as we had been before with our staff, taking our direction from the building committee on as far as where they want to be on the design and the time and the effort that they think is necessary to get to the end of feasibility and to a preferred schematic. And that particular length of time to get to the preferred schematic, in the last month or so, there was a decision made by the committee to extend that, and we have a schedule that shows that, and we're continuing to work on that schedule. So that's the Hill end. We're completely stopping.
So Peter, what is the new opening the school date? We've just dropped 2 months on the project.
Well, so we're working on that schedule now. There's continuing discussions with the group on when the schematic design is going to be done and completed. What dates can we continue with the design based upon when the schematic is approved and how it is approved? What is going to be the appetite for the town to proceed with design development after schematic, depending on the cost, because there's times associated with that. And also we've looked very carefully at the last month in the time allotted for construction, exactly what we have for construction, because we are doing more information into the construction. So the schedule has been a moving schedule, and those dates are being identified now. But there's been a lot of work done on those, and there's been a delay in the last not a delay. There's been a desire in the last month to move the schematic and start of design development out to get some more community input, et cetera. Laura?
Yeah, actually, that's the point I was going to make. When we reset, we were aggressive with the schedule. And then as reality of what that schedule was started to play out, it was just simply too aggressive. We were going to miss very, very key important pieces of community input and really doing the work you were just referencing, which is working really hard to get as much of the list of things, both educationally and the community wants, within the 100 million. So we did step back and propose an extension to that timeline of a couple of months, so we can do community forums, so we can be at meetings like this, so we can reach out to other groups. Those are on the calendar and built within the couple of months. And starting Monday night, there's a community forum. So we really just simply needed that I don't even want to say extra time. We needed the time allotment within the plan so that when we bring you a schematic design and end of feasibility, we don't have the community feel like it was a surprise because they weren't able to be as engaged unless they were at a 7:30 a.m. building committee or design committee meeting. So we really have got a roadshow going in the meantime. I'm sorry if you misinterpreted it as something else happening there. We really just had to sit and look at the reality of what had been proposed and drafted, and it just felt too rushed. So we're trying to do that for the good of the community.
I'm actually fine with all of what you all said. Okay. What I'm not fine with is on the January 7th meeting, Hill needed to say those things. Hill needed to come in strongly and say, we have new staff on the case. We had to extend the whole schedule. We're really going to rework all this, because it has a cascade effect. we're in the tiniest little piece of that Gantt chart. There's an enormous number of steps after that, and they all stretch if we're not at least
So-
stating things. That's all. And because of the changeover in staffing from Hill, there was literally no mention from Hill. We are absolutely in your section of the project, Kristen, and you have every right to be driving everything in a way that you can get the work done properly. But Hill needs to take a stronger voice. It has to be
Dean, there was no lack of there was no delay. Nothing had to do at all with Hill changing at zero.
All I'm saying is you need to mention that in the meeting. We're managing.
Okay,
the
at that
project.
point on June,
Lost
at that
too
point
much.
on June 7th, we were just going through that process.
Okay, I've got to wrap this up. I'm sorry.
Okay, I have one more question, and I'll be quick.
Please.
The amount of square footage that we can afford is driven by how much it costs to build a square foot. We've had a couple of questions around the table today about that. Can we get a range of the numbers that the construction cost? What are benchmark type numbers, and where do we get those numbers from so that we can sort of understand how big a building we can build?
Isn't that the work of the design subcommittee?
I don't know that any of the resident members
coming.
are expert in that.
It's
coming, Stephen.
It's coming. That work is being developed, and that's a whole part of the schematic design process. And can I just say two quick things about the schedule, and then I will mute myself again happily. The first thing is, and I'm going to step on Lori's toes here a little bit, but she didn't mention this, but this is definitely a change that we made as a committee that was through her leadership. Version 1.0 of this, a high priority was not a mid-year move. And one of the things that's happened in COVID-19 is how adaptable everybody has learned to be. And that really has made it so a mid-year move isn't as big a deal as it
Sounds
really
like
was thought to
nothing
be.
now.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's not a big deal. And what you have to, that Gantt chart, you'll have to look at it like an accordion, Dean. And the compressions and expansions were like, well, if we can move it in an April vacation or over the summer or whatever. But the other part, and so now that pressure, that backside pressure isn't there, we're okay trying to facilitate a mid-year move. The second part is there are statutory and bylaw-driven dates that move all around, and it's town meeting, warrant dates, ballot, approval dates, election dates. And as you know, those are complicated and have certain timelines built in. So if you change a day on the schedule, like you said, it has a cascading effect. The part of the scheduling we're in now, and it is complicated, is what is the goal of the schedule? And we are working towards that with the full committee. And once we have our schedule goal and agree with that, what that is, it'll be solidified and I think clear to everybody. But one of the primary goals, as Lori noted, is we want to have enough public input so people can make an informed decision.
Great, thank you.
Hey, thanks. I'm happy. Thanks. I
Good.
appreciate all your
Don,
time.
Thank you for coming here. I hope you took this as community input, the beginning of community input. I do want to summarize though and say I think that the finance committee is mostly concerned with the impact to the property taxpayers, because as you know, $100 million is $1,000, and it's a 20-year note, so it's $1,000 a year for 20 years to pay for the school. And not only that, but we've got other capital needs within the town that are pent up behind this. So that's I think at least where I'm coming from, which is let's be prudent about the decisions. How are these decisions being made? We want to be involved up front and not just wait until we go to town meeting and it's a yes, no on a big number. So that's why we're having these conversations now, which brings me to my next point. When would be a good time for us to have our next conversation? It looks to me like you've got your design, or you're going to be making some cost.
I was just going to ask, yes, and thank you for that, Mary, and we very much appreciate this. And I, being here and having these discussions. Kristen, when is the first estimate due again? Can you remind me?
I was actually thinking it might be prudent to meet after our February 11th CMSBC, at which point we will have talked about construction manager at risk and DVB and also the schedule.
Okay.
That February meeting, we could at least take it to that point. And we wouldn't be looking at any updates to the estimates until March.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kristen, because we're going to be a lot further along on the determination factors in the schedule and some more solid dates.
So you're saying what, late February, March?
Late February.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we want to have that part of the meeting, then we'll have a part of the meeting.
You and I will be in touch and see if that's still a good date. We can resume this. I appreciate
good.
I really do. This is great. This has been better than I thought. We've learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Okay, everyone, that was a good conversation. I enjoyed that. Our next up, we have Chris. I think you've got Carl Seidman in the waiting room to do our presentation about the NMI StarMet.
Joining.
There you are. Carl.
Meet myself. Great.
Welcome. Thank you for waiting. I'm sorry the discussion went overboard a little bit, but it went overtime and overboard.
That's right. Yeah. An important and complicated project. So
yes, it is. It is. I just want to give a brief introduction to the Finance Committee. Carl's here tonight to give us a presentation of a draft of a report that's going to be delivered to the Select Board on what's happening with NMI StarMet. He's here to inform us about what's happening, and then just to ask for any input on any, I think, glaring problems we see with the report. Is that about accurate, Carl?
yeah, right. And also I think, while this is a project that's, 5 to 7 years out in terms of development, it is going to have fiscal implications for the town. So I think we wanted to make sure also it's on the Finance Committee's radar screen, and you could be part of conversations that will happen as planning for the site and potentially the town's role as an owner of the site evolve.
Great, good. Okay, we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, let me share my screen and get the presentation slides up. Okay, can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just thank you for making time to meet with me and hear about this project. So just to give a very high overview, that the committee was established to assist the town in identifying potential reuse of the 2229 Main Street site, for maximum benefit. This is a site, if people are not familiar with it, it's about 46 acres on Main Street. And it's a site that, was contaminated. It's on the Superfund. And the final cleanup design work is going on now. It's expected that the cleanup will take another 5 to 7 years. So we've completed a draft report. The committee, we're looking for review and comment before we send a final report to the Select Board in March. And I guess our key recommendation is we've identified a sort of flexible master plan concept, a fairly high level reuse concept for the site with several alternatives for how it might be implemented. And also we've identified some issues that we think are important for the Select Board and the town government more broadly to address, including risk communication, so that people better understand the nature of the site and risks associated with reuse, how to address town ownership, dealing with any guidance that the contractors need in terms of input into the cleanup design, and then thinking towards reuse and implementation, doing more analysis of the market, potential third-party interest in the site, and probably particularly important for the Finance Committee, better understanding the fiscal impact of reuse options. So just to give you a quick time frame, I mean, this site was under private corporate use as a materials processing plant for close to 50 years. and due to that activity, you know, a contamination happened in 2001. It was placed on the Superfund National Priorities list, the site was abandoned by its last private owner, StarMet, in 2011. And then the EPA, which has overseen the cleanup planning, also did some interim cleanup efforts, removing the building structures, dealing with groundwater issues, doing some remediation work. And then in 2015, the record of decision, which outlines the broad cleanup plan, was completed. And then in 2019, the final consent decree was approved that really begins the cleanup process. And the contractor that's doing the cleanup design is working on that. And as I mentioned, the cleanup process is expected to take 5 to 7 years. So potentially somewhere around 2026, the site would actually be, you know, available for reuse. And the town may actually end up in taking ownership before that. So in terms of the work of the Reuse Planning Committee itself, we began work in June of 2019. We initially worked on creating development principles and our outreach community engagement process. We held a public forum in October of 2019. There was actually 2 public meetings, one after the other. And then we, you know, in late 2009, early 2020, we considered the public input, began to think about reuse concepts, reported back to the Board of Selectmen, and then began in the spring of 2020 developing our preliminary development scenarios. We then went back and did another community survey in the summer to get particular feedback on a number of issues we were grappling with in the reuse planning concept. And then in the summer and fall, we did additional research due diligence on other issues associated with reuse, and then have drafted this report, which was completed in early December. And now we're in the process of reaching out to additional town committees and other organizations to get feedback before we finalize the report and submit it to the select board in March. So the reuse principles we settled on were fourfold. One is looking at having multiple integrated uses at the site. It's a large site at 46 acres. The town has a lot of needs, so we really felt we should think about multiple uses at the site. Developing the site with environmental stewardship in mind to preserve environmental assets, be carbon neutral, and improve landscape resilience for the town. Having a fiscally sustainable approach in how we reuse the site and deal with costs associated with it. And then this notion of community synergy, how can we use the site and activity and uses at the site in ways that strengthen relationships within the community and with our neighboring towns. So first, I just want to show you on this map, one of the first parts of the planning process is really to sort of understand reuse zones within the site. And you know, based on site conditions and site resources, a large part of the site, which you see in that map, C1, C2, are natural areas and have you know, natural assets that need to be reserved. They're not suitable for development with a bog and wetland. So those areas really are seen as for conservation uses and open space. Areas D and B also are not suitable for reuse. Area B has some contaminated material that's going to be capped and kept on site. And And then D was used as a holding pond. It's basically going to be part of the site's stormwater management system. So we're really left with these areas A1, A2, A3, A4, which are about 26 acres, which in theory could be used for future reuse. So A1 is where the building was located, and that's the most readily reusable part of the site. The other areas, A2, A3, A4, would need some site work and grading, and clearing for future reuse if and development if that was ultimately decided to go forward. So the master plan concept, and I apologize a little, these are very amateurist drawings that have been done by committee members. We are working on higher quality, more professional representations of this, which I think will be in the final report. But this master plan concept, as I mentioned, is really to leave those areas in C1, C2, D, and B as undeveloped and available for conservation. For trails, there are adjacent trails that we hope to connect to and use it as an area for observing nature, enjoying nature, and potentially for educational type uses as well. And then the A1 would be the primary building area that could accommodate a range of uses. And then there'd be ring road to provide the sort of initial transportation access, and the other areas of the site could potentially be used for development. They could be maintained as open space or be used for other recreational type purposes like sports fields. So just to show you a few of the iterations of this concept, the first option is to kind of focus on the A1 site for municipal uses, recreational uses, community-oriented uses, such as an indoor recreation center or a community center or a senior center or some combination of the three, and potentially adding sports fields on the periphery of that. And this is an image from a project in Boulder, Colorado that some of the committee members have identified, just to give you a sense of how a complex of that site might look, and sort of to validate that it could fit within the footprint of that A1 area. The second option is really to focus development on private commercial use on that A1 site, and that might be office development, medical uses, and then the peripheral sites might be used in the future for housing or recreational uses. And then the third option really focuses on concentrating development on that A1 site, leaving A2, A3, A4 largely undeveloped, and looking at that area as a mixed-use area that could accommodate a combination of housing, recreation, perhaps some retail use, perhaps artisan studios, and once again, perhaps having an opportunity for athletic fields or outdoor recreation on some of the peripheral areas of A2, A3, or A4. So the committee has come up with some near-term and long-term recommendations for the select board. One is to begin the process of thinking through how the town would take ownership of the site and what the pathway for that would be. I think we're recommending that because that will ensure the town has greater control over development and allow development to move forward without potential problems associated with existing title or lien issues on the site. To start more active and detailed planning for redevelopment based on the master plan concept. This is a very high level concept. The committee has not got into the issues of what the actual infrastructure needs for the site would be and how that would affect the design, and doing more detailed planning around that. There are some remedial design issues the contractor needs to address, and we need to finalize recommendations around them. what to finally do with the Site B, whether vegetation should be put on top of that or something like that, whether any of the sites that are going to be green should have plantings established on them, or they should be left for future development or things like that. So there are a number of issues around the cleanup plan that we need to finalize recommendations on over the next several months, and then to begin initiating risk communication efforts so that people are much more aware of the site and understand that the actual cleanup, I didn't mention this earlier, it's very important. The actual cleanup plan is to clean the site up to residential standards. Those are the highest standards, and that allows for potential reuse for, commercial use, industrial use, municipal use, or any real reuse is possible with those cleanup standards. And then lastly, to design on what mechanism the select board wants to use to continue planning for the site's redevelopment. Does it want to continue the reuse planning committee, establish a new committee, do it through another, the town planning department? What is the appropriate mechanism to continue work on planning for reuse? And then longer term recommendations. First, to adopt reuse principles. We think it's important to reuse the site for a neutral or positive fiscal impact for reuse, given the fiscal issues and capital needs the town faces over the next 5 to 10 years. Also, to look to adopt a sustainability overlay zoning. This is a concept we learned about that has been applied at Fort Evans reuse, and this would require all electric net zero development and other sustainable land use requirements. Secondly, to begin to do more outreach and engagement with third parties to test the interest of developers or other private users in using the site, developing the site, how they might enter in partnership with the town to facilitate that, what the financial implications of that would be. And lastly, to commission the finance committee to undertake a fiscal impact study to better understand the cost and revenues to Concord under different reuse options. The committee has not really done that work at all. And while we've had this broad principle of having a neutral or positive fiscal impact, we really have not given any serious analysis to how, the reuse concept we developed or the alternatives would impact the town fiscally. So I think that is the presentation. I now welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
Great. Thank you very much. That was great. And the work that you're doing is great. It's a big piece of land. It's big.
It is.
And the other thing that I was surprised to learn when I read it is that a lot of this land is kind of virgin land, really. It's like the land that's going to be preserved for open space or trails that's never been used. It's
right. That's true. That is true. Yes.
I always had the impression that the whole thing was contaminated, and that's not true at all.
No, that's not true. It's primarily that A1 area and some small portions of part of the peripheral site, but yeah, there is uncontaminated, a large portion of uncontaminated
That's
land.
the word. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it up. Any comments, questions from the Finance Committee? Dee.
Carl, thank you. Your report is excellent. It's so detailed, and I really appreciated all that detail. That said, I do have just a couple of quick questions for you.
Sure.
One of them is, you talked a lot in the document, you talked about a lot of the lien holders and the implications of that. Do you have any idea how many lien holders there are?
I don't know off the top of my head. There are a number of lenders that have liens associated with the prior private owners. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert on this, but the several $100 million is going to be spent on the cleanup.
Okay. Well, I'm just, yeah.
And I imagine the EPA and the, will be able to have a senior, as the federal government, and may be able to override those liens. So, I think this is why we think it's this, the town council needs to get involved and better understand the legal process, and, and whether there's a mechanism through which the federal government can clear those liens, take title and convey it to the town at minimal cost, or at some negotiated cost that's feasible for the town. Once again, I'm speculating. This is not my area of expertise. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's the kind of due diligence and work that we think
that needs to be done, right?
Thinking about.
Yes, yeah. My other question, and
before you go further,
let me just
Wait.
Chris, Greg is trying to get in.
Harsher, what?
Greg is trying to get in. Greg Gorillo's got his hand raised, I think, to get back into the meeting. That's all.
Oh, thank you.
I just had one other quick comment for Carl. Carl, one of the options that you explore is one where the town just purchases, they sign the agreement and they take over the property. And I'm wondering, with all of the reconstruction that's going on that site, I'm wondering, do you have any feel for the amount of maintenance it would cost, or the cost associated with the maintaining it? Just as a blanket, they've put it back to residential quality property, and just to maintain it?
Yeah, once again, we have not done any work to look at that issue. There are what I call institutional controls, which basically are legal restrictions on what could be done. So obviously some oversight of that, is necessary. I don't know what the responsibility is for the groundwater monitoring system that's gonna be on the site. Once again, is that the town's responsibility, or is that, EPA or Mass DEP's? Once again, I don't, I'm not familiar with, I don't know the answer to that question, but obviously that's something to understand. And the 2229 committee, which has been more involved in the actual cleanup process and knows more about the technicalities of the cleanup, may know more about that. But once again, that's, I think, part of the due diligence and work that the town needs to do in understanding its future costs associated with.
Okay, so if I can just summarize, I think that the purpose of your document is just to get the select board to take further action. Is that correct?
Right, and to sort of provide a sort of initial concept around which further planning could be done.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? So Lois, go ahead.
Hi, do you have any idea what it would cost to do an analysis of some of the factors that you don't know about yet? I mean, reasonably so. I understand that it's not your expertise, but the status of the liens, the cost of clearing them, has there been any analysis or thought given to what the impediments would be to the town getting the title that would let it pursue some of these things?
We haven't done that research. I think, our thought might be that the town council might begin to start that work, whether additional legal services would be needed to answer those questions or not. I'm not sure. I mean, the one thing I will say is there's been a lot of reuse of Superfund sites and a lot of experience with this. So I think, within the EPA and Mass DEP, there's probably a lot of legal expertise that the town can draw on, and wouldn't necessarily have to hire outside legal counsel to better understand some of those issues. But we have not explored that.
What's the timeline, Carl? What is
Excuse me?
What is the timeline? When does the town need to decide if they want to take ownership of this or not?
I mean, they have time, because the actual cleanup of the site is 5 to 7 years away. I think, I think that, the EPA in funding this, I think, what I've been told is they would like some reassurance that they're not spending hundreds of millions of dollars without our, without our intent to reuse the site, right? And that's likely to require some action by the town. So I think that the EPA would, I'm not necessarily, I'm not sure, they want the town to take ownership quickly, but, and my understanding is town meeting has indicated its intent to take ownership of the site. So, but it's not something that has to happen immediately. I think one of the questions in the reuse planning might be how fast the town wants to move into reuse after the cleanup's done, and whether it might want to take ownership and start making improvements to the site so that it can move more quickly with reuse, as opposed to waiting till the site's totally cleaned up and then taking ownership, which might delay it. But once again, this is part of the further planning, and obviously what the costs are to the town to make improvements and acquire the site, and how that fits in with other capital needs associated with the town, are all issues that also have to get weighed in around this.
I do need to point out one thing for I think your longer term recommendations recommended that the finance committee be involved to do maybe cost benefit analysis for some of the alternatives that you're pursuing. That's actually something that the finance committee can't do, actually, because and I think the town would probably want to hire consultants to do that.
Right.
There are two reasons. The finance committee can observe other committees in town, but they can't actually be members of other committees. So that's and plus I don't know if we have the expertise and the bandwidth to do it either.
Right. Okay. So now that's very helpful. So we can certainly adjust that.
Yeah.
I guess, would it make sense to say the town should undertake a study, but with input from the finance committee?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just, I guess, Kathy, you have something you want to say?
Yes, I have a question for Carl.
Go ahead.
It certainly is a great thing that the EPA is willing to clean up the site at their expense and not ours. Is it possible for the town to take possession and just make it another open land, conservation land, without doing any development on it?
I mean, it's possible to do that. It's certainly possible. I guess the perspective of the committee is there are a lot of needs in town. And this is a very large, it's a very large site, perhaps the largest site that will be available in the town to support uses that could address community needs. And given the level of investment that's being made to make the site clean for new development, that at least a portion of the site should be brought into new uses.
And it does look like you folks have come up with some interesting ideas for reuse. I guess from a finance standpoint, I'm just thinking about, what does the town have in plans to expend money, and what would that money, amounts be? So, there might be a period of time where we need to carry it as raw land.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what the right timing is for bringing it into reuse is obviously a question for the town to think about. I think the other, it's also not clear, might there be options in which the costs of preparing the land for development would not have to be assumed by the town, either because of developers might take on that cost, or a particular new user that wants the site for its own purposes might be willing to take on those costs. It might be possible to use a mechanism like tax increment financing so that the cost of that could be repaid by tax revenue generated from new development. So, there may be options that would allow development to proceed, that would not entail fiscal costs
Right.
to the town. And once again, that's part of the additional planning and analysis and engagement with third parties that we're recommending to sort of clarify those options.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all.
If I could ask one question, Dee pointed to, the web of liens that may exist, but I have a slightly different question, and that is, how is the environmental risk going to run as we take ownership of the land? Does it stay with the EPA? Do we assume any or some risk? How just address that? You have on your first slide and on your last slide, you said risk communication, whatever that meant. But
I mean, the risk communication, I think, is to help the public better understand how, the risks of the site and what the cleanup does. Because, I think in the public outreach we've had to date, there is a sort of perception that since this was contaminated and since, depleted uranium was one of the contaminants, that, this site is radioactive or things, I think that's what we're trying to deal with on the risk communication. In terms of financial risk associated with the past contamination, that remains with the responsible parties, which include the private firms that did manufacturing at the site, and the Department of Defense and other federal agencies that were their customers. So the town would not assume any financial risk for past, if there was a discovery of new contaminants that were left on the site and not cleaned up, or something of that nature, that's the responsibility of the responsible parties. The town would only be responsible if new contamination happened under the town's ownership. But
Right.
any past contamination remains the liability of the responsible parties.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Any other questions? Carl, I'd just like to be clear on what we would see as the impacts to the budget going forward because of this. And I'm thinking that you're saying that at first we're going to need work done by town council to understand some of these questions, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then once the town took ownership, if we take ownership, and it seems like it would be likely, we would have some maintenance costs to monitor some of the performance of the systems that are there, and
right. I mean, you have to cut I guess, you have to maintain the whatever natural, I imagine that some of the site will have plantings on it that will require some sort of maintenance and,
right.
And things like that. So, and then I think you may want to be thinking about, there may be some consulting costs associated with fiscal impact analysis, or, some of the infrastructure planning work that might have to be done and associated with.
While the site is idle, if we take ownership and the site is idle, doesn't the town incur some costs for things like maintaining some of the treatment systems and restrictions that are going to be on it? So we have some.
I'm not sure what the responsibility is for maintenance of the groundwater monitoring. That I'll check back. I'll see if anyone else on the committee and folks who've been more involved in the cleanup planning know that. So I could get back to you about what the responsibility is for the groundwater monitoring.
I think in the WR Grace example, Grace needed to just be allowed to access that land. And as long as we gave them access, they would manage the wells that they're monitoring wells on the Grace land. So that might be an example of something that we've worked ourselves through.
I thought NMI Starmet was bankrupt though. thought they.
That's true, but
Right.
this is an EPA thing. Maybe the EPA would do the, you know.
Right, and I think the responsible part, there is funding through the responsible parties. Once again, I don't know, I would imagine there is some funding provision for some of that ongoing monitoring, but once again, I don't know for sure, so I'll look into that.
That's fine, that's fine. I will say though, that one of your other long-term recommendations to make this neutral, have the impact to the town be neutral fiscally, I thought that was, that's a great idea, either through public-private partnerships or some grants or whatever. I thought that was a worthy goal in your report. Anything else? Anybody has to say? Thanks for doing this.
Right, and I'd just say if any other comments or questions come to mind over the next, few weeks, feel free to reach out to me. I think we're hoping to pull together all comments by early February so the committee can then incorporate them into the final draft of the report.
Great, good. Exciting work. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, I'm back to our agenda. Chris, would you like us to adjourn the full committee and go back to the guideline?
I don't, unless we have to, Mary, because otherwise we have to make a recommendation to the full committee, so we have to come back again, right? I think that's technically how it works, but since we are the same group, unless it's a problem with the agenda, we could just, if we could just do it here, that's fine, but I don't know if it's a problem.
I need Carrie's help. Carrie, are you still with us?
I am. I don't mean to be a stick in the mud, but I think you need to go back to.
Right. So
Yeah, I was afraid.
adjourn and then we'll start again.
How about this instead, Carrie? Can I just move ahead with the agenda items on the regular committee and then we move back? No, because we have to come back. Oh, for crying out loud. Okay, we're gonna have to, I need a motion to adjourn the regular committee.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I'm gonna go around and do a roll call to adjourn this meeting. Dee?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Chris?
Yes.
Dean?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Kathy? Lois?
Yes.
Arshar?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, Chris, you've got to call your meeting to order.
Okay.
This is town government.
All right. It looks like it's 8:55 and we're going to call to order meeting of the Guidelines Subcommittee of the Finance Committee. This is Chris Reynolds. I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is being recorded and potentially broadcast. So we will open the meeting with roll call. Chris Reynolds, and I'm here. Dee Ortner.
Here.
Mary Hartman.
Here.
Dean Banfield.
Here.
Brian Taylor.
Here.
Phil Swain.
Here.
Ray Andrew.
Here.
Dick Jameson.
Here.
Kathy Kuklo.
Here.
Lois Wassoff.
Here.
Parashar Patel.
Here.
Andrea Zoll.
Here.
John Hickling.
Here.
Greg Guarello.
Here.
And I think I got everybody. Did I get everybody? Okay, good. All right, so we will go back to where we were. So let me pull up the presentation. And it's not working. Hold on. The heck is this? Okay, Zoom. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So going back to our famous chart here. So I think what we can do, so to deal with the debate over whether we should talk about the levy limit reserve at 435 or not, is let's just talk about what we have to spend. So we have the 95.5 from last year, the way the calculation, so this is a calculation that the state dictates as to what 2.5 is, right? So what you have to spend before you have to go to vote. You start with the prior year base, the 95.5. You add the 2.5%. You can add in your excluded debt service. You can add in your new growth. So the levy limit, as we calculate it for FY22, is 105.8 million. Okay, so if we just keep that in our heads, so that's what we have to spend. So if you compared that to what we levied in FY21, that's a spread of about 7 million or so in room for tax. So we decide, this group decides, we decide what we want to recommend for how much you want to levy, how much tax do you want to levy out of that spread of 7 million or so, right? So how much more, or you can levy less, but you know, I was assuming we would have some increase. So the most we can go is up to 101.5. Okay, so that's that. Now, if we go to the next page, let's just go to the next page. And we say, all right, well, what is it we have to pay for? So we have an estimate. So we have, if you remember, Kerry came to talk to us in November with some revenue and fixed cost estimates. The revenue meaning the non-property tax revenue, what I'll call the, you know, the other, which is the local receipts, the state aid, et cetera, including the amount that we take from free cash under the moderate scenario. So originally we had a worst case and a best case. And then most recently, last week, Kerry came back with a moderate case. And under the moderate case, our other revenue, I want to call it that, the non-property tax revenue is down 1.2 million, or projected to be down in FY22. On top of that, we're estimating our fixed cost growth. So that's debt service, Minuteman, benefits, OPEB, retirement. So things that are outside the guideline are considered non-discretionary costs. Those per a more updated estimate, and I'll let her speak to that in a minute, is about a $300,000 increase. So without doing anything, those two amounts need to be covered by taxes. So we have 1.5 million that we need to cover. Okay, without anybody having COLA or anything else, right? There's 1.5 million to cover. So that's kind of a hole that you start with. And the other piece that we know is that in the high school, we have an enrollment shift. So I believe this is the second year in a row that we've had an enrollment shift that requires us to carry more of the cost of the high school because we have more students. This year, the number is over 400,000, which is not a small number. So we're going to have to cover that as well. So we have, or we don't have to cover it, but we know it's a cost in my model that somebody's going to have to do something with. So in my view, and again, we can debate this, that cost is not a cost that's controlled by the high school. So it's not them asking for labor or materials or capital expenditures. It's something that's happening because there's more students proportionally from Concord in the high school than there are from Carlisle. So for purposes, and we did the same thing last year, we sort of took that off the top, if you will, and said, we think we need to fund it. So again, we can debate how we fund it, whether we raise taxes for it or we get it from somewhere else, but I counted it as something that needed to be funded. So you add all those three up, I think you need, 1.9 million at least in the levy. So now you can talk about how much of a levy limit you want to have, how much you want the taxpayers to bear, how much you think inflation impacts this or not. So we can start to have the debate. There's a model that Kerry has And again, this is what I came up with. So the way I did this is I assumed I didn't go further into the levy limit. I sort of left it the room that we had last year because I think it's a good thing, but again, it's debatable. I took out the things I had to cover and I said, I think you could probably raise 3 million in taxes. You cover the things you have to cover. You're left with 1.9 million before you make the adjustment to the high school for the enrollment. And that would result in a 2.18% increase in guideline spending, which my view is that's reasonable. But this is just an example that I wanted to bring up to you. It's my proposal, but now is the time to debate it. So I will leave the floor open to you guys to say, how do you want to talk about it? There is a model that we can use Carrie can put up as we discuss this, where we can do what ifs. So if you say, what if we did this? What if we did that? We can calculate on the fly the impact to the amount that we're raising. And we can also tell you, as I described on the next page, that what these changes mean. So the proposal that I had to raise the amount available by a little bit over 2%, that ends up being a 2.71% increase in property tax on the base. So those are the folks, meaning the value of the property that existed before you get into FY22. So it means you exclude your new growth, essentially. So what is the tax to existing taxpayers? So their taxes would go up 2.71%. That translates into about $370 on the median tax bill, raising it to $14,032.
So on your prior page, you had 2.17, and then the other slide that I questioned, 2.18, excuse me. And the other slide that I questioned had over 3% increase.
Yep, the different measures, right? So they're not all the same thing. So it's a 3% increase over the levy, right? So all I'm doing is I'm taking 3.4 million over 98.1. So it's a 3% increase if you look at it in terms of the gross levy, Kathy.
So that's not what individual would pay?
No.
Okay. All right. So I can move
Get a
on.
little better about that.
Yeah.
All right.
Chris, while you're on this slide,
Yeah.
I do want to just go back because the levy primer maybe it confused me more, but you said something that I'm wondering. Technically speaking, we can actually increase the levy all the way to 105.8. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Without an override.
Without an override. You want to go higher
Exactly.
than
Okay.
that,
So
we need to-
that's question
Go
number one.
higher. You can
Sorry?
go higher because we have capacity that is unused that's sitting on the table. So you could levy more and still not require an override.
That's the limit. The one.
No, what do you mean, Dean?
No, that is the limit.
Let me share my screen, Chris, and I will show you what I mean.
Oh,
So
I don't
put
want to
this
do
down for a
that.
second.
What is it you did?
What is it I did?
Yeah.
I have a chart from the budget book, from the FY21 budget book I want to show you. That will.
Dean, before you show that to us, just this is confusing me now more because I think in our previous session, folks said there's really no reserve, if you will. And now I'm hearing, which I thought was correct, is that there is a reserve from which we can draw to increase.
It's not money,
Not
partial.
money, no.
It's we are allowed to levy more without getting into an override mode. That's all.
I understand it's not money, but conceptually it is money.
Yes,
we can
it's
draw.
there.
I understand it's not real money.
It's available.
Yeah, okay, thank
We
you.
have the capacity to do it.
Okay, and this is where, before you pull anything up, this is my question. If we say we're gonna have this limit reserve of 4.3, does that add to the capacity that you're gonna pull up in a minute or no?
No.
No, I don't believe it would. It may. Let me think about that.
It's
We're
not
gonna have the capacity to levy 108, but we're only gonna levy 101. So the answer is yes, it will add to that reserve account.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to understand before. And so my final question, and I'm sorry, to be doing this, but so we could actually say, you know what, we're gonna stick with 98.1 and have the reserve go to that capacity, right? I mean, there's a balancing act we can do.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
true.
Okay, I'll shut up now. Thank
So
you.
let me just show you the page from the budget book so you kind of have a history of how our levy capacity has run. So if you could take that down for a second, Chris.
Did that work or no?
It did. Let me just find the correct screen that I want to share. Original budget. Oh, hold on.
But that 4.3 is not real money anywhere. It's
No,
just-
it's just math. It's just math. It's the difference
Okay.
between what you can charge and what you might charge. That's all it is.
All right.
2.5, we could raise taxes up to 105,
Yes.
Right.
which would be a huge tax increase, but
Yes,
we-
it would, which
Yes,
we
it would.
wouldn't do.
Yes, it
Exactly
would.
right.
Very good.
Right. All right. So the numbers you see on the right-hand column are unused levy limit, meaning in a given year, this is the additional beyond 2.5% that we would be allowed to levy. Look at 1992. In 1992, all we had available to levy in addition to 2.5% was $1,500. We immediately levied, a little less than 2.5%, which puts some reserve available, and we built that up. Somewhere along the line, we had some really big, I don't know, maybe we had a big growth years or something where we didn't have to levy at a full 2.5%. So every penny of capacity to levy at 2.5 that we did not spend got put into this account, and it has been growing for years. So we did, in my early years on the finance committee, these couple of numbers here, we were cutting into it. We were eating into it. It went from 3.6 down to 3.2, but then we've added back. We've been adding back to it. So it bubbles around, and I think we have a lot of capacity there. So if we want to levy, we can, but as Kathy's pointed out, it would really make the number that we're going with a very big number. But we have the right to do it up to like $4 additional million if we needed to. But that's a different question. But the way you've got it set up, Chris, we're going to add money to this. We're going to go from 4,107 to something like 530 or
Right.
something.
Right. Yeah. Again, it was the way I did the math, Dean.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not trying to say it has to be 435, but
Yeah.
the main issue is going to be how much do you really want to raise tax? Not, we have plenty of room in
That's
capacity.
actually the question.
Right.
Absolutely.
That is right. So, okay. All right.
I'll
So
stop
can I
now.
go back to my stuff now?
Yep, absolutely.
Chris, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
I just want to see if the way I'm understanding the slide where you show the money available for the guideline is accurate. Because I thought I understood it.
Can you see it now?
Not yet.
No?
Not yet.
Oh, boy.
There
There we go.
There you go. Okay, good.
Okay, go down to the slide that starts with the 3.4 million.
Okay.
Just want to see if I understand this correctly so that we can talk. Okay. Okay.
Right.
The
So-
3.4 million number comes from two assumptions. One is we've raised property taxes by 2.5 on the existing base.
Right.
And we've kept the levy capacity at 4.35%.
And we factor in the increase in excluded debt service, which is about 90 grand.
Okay. Okay.
Everything's in there.
Okay. So then out of that 3.4, that's what we have available, given those assumptions.
Given those assumptions, right?
Out of that 3.4, we have to cover a revenue decline, mostly in local receipts of 1.2.
Right.
We also have to cover about 300,000 in fixed costs over and above FY21.
Right.
So that leaves us with 1.9 left for guideline spending, which is what we're all about tonight, right?
Exactly right.
Okay. And out of that 1.9, you're recommending that right off the top, we take the 400,000 because that's the enrollment shift. I could totally agree with you. And what that means is we're left with 1.5 to appropriate among the three budgeting entities.
Right.
If we want to keep these other assumptions constant, which is
Right.
2.5, the 4.35, and that whatever it was for the excluded
Right.
debt. And,
You can monkey around with them and they just flow through these numbers. Exactly. Right.
Okay, and that this also means, so these are the percents we have to allocate for our preliminary guideline. And that would result in, if all these assumptions held constant, that it would result in a property tax increase of 2.71%.
Correct.
Right?
That's
Okay.
right.
Okay, that's what we have in front of us as far as the proposal.
So I have one question. And if we can go back to the previous slide, Chris, and Carrie, you might be able to help us. The 1.5 million, which is the estimated decline. When do we think we might have a better sense of whether or not the 1.5 is 0.5, whether it's minus 2.0, or whether it's 0, Carrie?
You're talking about the 1.2?
Yeah, well, yeah, the 1.2.
Okay.
Now let's
So the biggest unknown, and it's actually, it's not as unknown now as it was at the beginning of the day, is the state budget. So the governor will be releasing his budget next Wednesday, but today he made an announcement about state aid to municipalities and said that it would increase 3.5%. So that came in very late in the day. We haven't factored that into this discussion yet, but that's about $300,000.
Okay, so, and then the other question, Chris, and Mary, what is the schedule by, what's the latest date by which we've got to give the guidelines?
February 26th.
Okay, so I guess one question I have, and here's kind of where I was going with this, but maybe we don't have to. It sounds like maybe we can wait until next Wednesday, et cetera, get a better handle on the 1.2. Maybe maybe it goes down 900,000 or whatever, but if we're still left in a little bit of a hole, has the committee ever given an if-then type of guideline? Something along the lines of this says, look, if in fact the numbers come in at a $900,000 reduction, when you're building the budget, then your guideline's going to be, 1.7, call it, or 1.8. And if it comes in at 0 or a range, then it's going to be 2.0 or something. Something like that, a conditional set of guidelines?
I think this is a conditional guideline. Chris, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm not aware that we've done that, right? But this is a preliminary guideline, and we can certainly describe in the communication to it that, we did this based on information as of a certain date. We know it's going to change. I mean, based on the discussions that we had with the school and the town, they're going to keep coming back to us, Parashar. The information is going to move around. I do think, though, the local, Charlie Baker is not going to help us with the local receipt. The majority of this problem is a local receipt problem.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth sending out the message now that, and there are other places that, so, and Carrie, I'll let you speak to this. The town, and I'm sure the schools as well, are continuing to look at, are there places, and the town has some, large benefit related items that they're maybe looking at that could result in some changes in some of these numbers. So I think it is going to be fluid. It is going to move around, but I don't think local receipts is going to move that much, right? And that's the thing that's really pounding us here. Carrie, do you want to chime in at all?
I think the only thing I want to say is I want everybody to be clear that you're scheduled tonight to vote a tentative guideline.
Right.
And you need to do that to give guidance,
yep,
direction to the cost centers.
Chris, can I say
yes,
something?
Please.
When we left last Thursday night, I remember the numbers we had then. Kerry made a statement, well, Stephen was giving his preliminary budget driver presentation, that the guideline was going to be about 1.15%. And I thought we had a big problem because that wouldn't even cover some of our contractual obligations, our COLA adjustments on our salaries. But this number actually does, the 1.7 would cover our contractual obligations. So as a preliminary number, I feel that it is reasonable because to me, it sends out the message, this is enough to cover at least your contractual obligations and a little bit more. And if you want to make incremental headcount changes, find the savings somewhere else. That's how I look at this guideline.
I agree philosophically with that approach. And can we just confirm that it covers all the contractual cost of livings? It does. Have you confirmed that?
Well, I had to make an assumption on what the COLA would be, right? And I looked at the budget books and I looked at the numbers that Kerry gave us last week for the budgeted salary, not actual salaries, but budgeted salaries. So the number's not, it's not clean, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a long way of saying yes.
Okay.
It would cover COLA.
Yeah. A way to think, the way to look at it as well is we didn't actually have a guideline. We did early in the year, but if you look at what actually happened in September, this number is larger than that. So it was like 1.1, 1.2 million. This is 1.5 after the allocation. It's 1.9 before. So it's not bad compared to last year. And again, there's a lot of moving parts because, I think at 2 point, whatever the changes to the taxpayer, oops, there we go. At 2.71, that's under 3. Would I like it to be lower? Yes, but I think if, it's going to be a tough year on both sides because we have revenue hits. What do other people think? So if this was.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How would we divvy that across the 3 entities that we have to then inform? That the regional district is going to get the lion's share because we're going to place 400,000 in that before we start talking about the rest of the number.
Right.
And then we'll think about what else to allocate to the district.
Right.
And should we just, 1.7 for each, for everybody, or is it?
Here's some
schools are negotiating with multiple bargaining units this year, so it's going to be
right. So those are the things we can't, we don't know yet where they're going to be, and actually they don't finish those contracts until after we're done. So
right.
But one way to think about it, I just was looking at what happened last year, right? So people have different levers. So if I'm going to look at it, CPS first, because CPS really had no lever. There's no E&D, right? So when you look at what they asked for last year, even after the cuts, they got the lion's share. So it was like 1.3 million went to CPS because they had nothing else to take it from. The town has capital expenditures and some other, they do have some reserves, although at this moment, perhaps a lot less than they had last year. And the high school built up a lot of reserves at the end of 20 that it can use into 22. So, and they did that purposely, which was a smart move on their part. So my own recommendation would be do not split it evenly. You could, perhaps, you could just say, I'm going to give something close to what we allocated to, or was budgeted, I should say. We didn't do it in a guideline. It's what ended up being budgeted at CPS. Give them the lion's share. Give the town nothing, because we know the town was able to cut 700,000 last year. And again, not because, they don't have COLA increases, they do, but they do have more levers in terms of capital expenditures, right? We have up to over 2 million in CapEx cash that could be deferred. I'm not looking, things could be deferred. So they have more latitude, not that they have less need. I'm sure they have lead. And then figure out what the rest is that could go to the high school. So that was my thinking, but that's just one proposal.
I think CPS has a little bit of wiggle room. I think they fund ahead in their sped accounts in their, if they can. And I think they do have some control over that.
Yeah, they might. Yeah, they do have a cup. They probably have some revolvers too as well. Sure.
Chris, I'm kind of, for last year, do I remember correctly that Stephen and Lori, Carrie and Jared got together and kind of traded a little bit? I'm wondering whether we might want to be open to saying to them, hey, you've got 1.5 million, right? We're going to set aside 400,000 here for enrollment increase. You've got 1.5 million. You guys come up with a split that you think works for the 3 units and come back to us with a recommendation, and we kind of see. Because, to your point, I agree about the levers, but I'm also wondering whether we ought to force a little bit more of that discipline on the schools, particularly if they've got contracts coming up and all that stuff, that you got to really make some hard choices. The town, I think, made some last year. And maybe let them go off and negotiate between them and come back to us, maybe. I don't know.
I think I'm very open to that, but I don't know if that meets our mandate or not.
It might fall outside the charter of what we're
Yeah,
supposed to be
that's what
doing.
that's the only thing I'm a little worried about, but I
like your free market proposal here, but I don't know if that's going to hold water with respect to our charter. The one thing I just have a quick question. I'm having just a little bit of trouble visualizing Christine, do you have what sort of in percentage and dollar amount what we actually allocated to the 3 buckets last year?
I do. I don't know if I have in percentage, but
Well, the dollar amounts would be great. Given that we've got 1.5. And then Carrie, I just have one follow-on question. When Parshar's question was great. The estimated other revenue decline, you had mentioned that there would probably be an increase in the decline by 300,000, or did I not understand that correctly?
Yeah, so that just this afternoon, the governor or the lieutenant governor made an announcement that the governor's budget will include a 3.5% increase in local aid. And so if you just, there are a lot of different components of local aid, but the 2 largest ones are Chapter 70 and the unrestricted, and 3.5%, the combined 3.5% increase of those 2 is about $300,000.
So does that mean that 1.2 would increase to 1.5?
no, it would go down to 0.9. It's an improvement. It's more revenue.
Okay, that's what I was trying to understand. Okay, thanks.
More revenue. So that's a plus. That's in our pocket right now.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. So the 1.5 could theoretically be 1.8.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right.
No. The 1.5, the one could go down to basically 1.2 because it's a $300,000 favorability.
Yes.
Exactly.
No.
More
to be allocated.
I'm talking about the dollar amounts part.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not talking about the percentage.
Yeah. I'm confused. Doesn't some of that money go directly to the schools? I mean,
yes, we're allocating in total here. You're absolutely right. So the high school gets its own money. We're not talking about their high school, but CPS gets money too, and that's in our total here.
Oh, okay. All right.
So with that idea, maybe Chris, your idea of letting the town sort of figure it out, maybe we do that with an understanding amongst us that, to the extent that 300,000 materializes, that portion, most of that might end up going to the town if it's favorable, because there's almost starting off from a zero basis, what you're saying, right?
Well, yeah, let me ask Carrie the question. So when you did the math on the 300,000, Carrie, that was CPS or that was CPS in the high school?
No, that was
CPS.
CPS Chapter 70 and unrestricted aid.
So good point, right? So we happen to show, anyway, what happens in the CCRSD budget is it kind of gets netted in, but they will have, if that's good news for them too, it means that they now have more potential sources of income on the high school, which is good. So it's a little bit good for CPS and a little bit good for the high school. Okay, so
Does that mean we can lower the tax increase?
you might be able to. I don't know that I would do that tonight, but you might be able to. I would wait until, I think I would wait until the budget, the governor comes out with the whole thing before I tinkered with it, but that's just me. That's again for 300.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so Brian, you asked about what we did last year. Okay,
Yeah.
so last year, do you want what the
More dollars,
increases
yeah.
were? You want the increases, right?
Yeah, I'd like to know what the increase was, the dollar amount.
All right, so
Carrie, do you have your model that we've used in prior years? That we
yeah,
could
she
put
does.
up?
She does, Dean. We
Yeah.
will get to that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we have it.
Yep.
Okay, so, all right, so CCRSD wanted or received 3.3 million in the FY21 budget.
Okay.
In the FY20 budget, it was 3.3. So it's pretty much, it was actually down 1%. It's very slightly. Okay, so they were flat. They were flat last year, essentially.
Okay.
The town for FY21 was like 3.4 million
Okay.
versus their, oh, I'm sorry, never mind. I'm giving you the wrong year. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, I'll go back. So the high school, let's see here. The high school was up slightly. The high school was up 2.2%, about 400 grand.
That's
Some of
after,
that was because there was a population shift.
That's right. That's right. It was net zero until we gave them that, right?
Yeah.
The town was down 650,000 or 2.35%. And CPS was up 3.52%.
but this was, Chris, I think this was after they did they redid the budget after.
Yeah, this is what actually happened.
This wasn't the guideline.
No, it was not. This has nothing to do with our guideline. This is what actually happened. Our
Okay.
guideline, we can't even talk about, right? Because that was if you want to do that,
Yeah.
that's a wholly different scenario, right? So I'm comparing what actually happened, right, from FY20. I don't want to go back to what we did last November. That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, so what the CPS was at 39.4 and they ended up at 40.8. So they went up about 1.4 million or 3.52%. So that's after all the machinations for COVID and this and that and the other thing. That's the actual difference between the 20 budget and the 21 budgets.
Okay.
Nothing to do with
So,
our guideline. We
Just
were
so,
out of it by that
can I
point.
read this? Can I just read this back to you? So CCRSD had a 2.35% increase.
No, well, 2.20, okay, close enough.
2.20. No,
Yep.
I just want to make sure I've got it right.
Yep.
The town was a 3.52 increase.
No, it was a negative 2.35. It's down. So the town was 28 million in 21 and it was 28.7 in 20. They came down like whatever it is here, over 600,000.
Okay.
They reduced their budget by 2.35%. CPS went up by 3.52 or
Okay.
1.4 million. And the high school is pretty flat. It was like $400,000 up or 2.2%.
2.2. Okay. Thank
Which,
you.
which as Dean pointed out, was really, they were really zero plus the enrollment shift. They had an enrollment shift last year as well.
And I think the town went down because they used free cash ahead of time.
We used 700,000 in free cash and surplus essentially.
And there were
But they also had some-
numerous savings in various accounts that they
Right.
knew of by the time we were finalizing the
That's
budget.
right. That's right.
This is kind of a wonky comparison.
It is.
It was so unusual. It's such an
It
unusual.
is, it is, but that, yeah, well, yeah.
Carrie, can I put you on the spot? I'm gonna ask a tough question. And I know Steven's not here. So do you feel comfortable that you'd be able to scrounge up another 700, 800 million dollars, whatever $1 million, like you might have done last year from looking under the sofa cushions and between the nooks and crannies in the different chairs?
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that. We have contracts that are being, negotiated as well. And I'm not, that's not something that I'm involved in. So, we talked about that a little bit last week, what our targets are for contract negotiations. But as Chris said, we allocated a very healthy amount to capital, and we certainly could look at foregoing capital. Those are not my decisions to make, and we're at the very beginning of our budget process, so I really can't speak on behalf of Stephen.
I mean, I'm inclined not to do that again to the town. That's my personal feeling. Chris, I feel comfortable with the 1.5, right? And then, I would go back and just figure out a way to divvy up the 1.5 without necessarily giving it all to one public unit versus the other. That's just my personal feeling.
Okay.
How about,
Mary, go ahead.
Chris, what about allocating the 1.5 among the three based on their salary, based on the
right? Yeah. Why don't you walk us through the work that you did, Mary, and show us what we might need if we use COLA?
Well, if I'll just throw out some numbers. If we just use COLA, then CPS would get about 700,000. CCRSD would get about 300, and the town would get about 450. So what does that come out to be? 1450, and we're at 1.5. So we have another 50.
Close enough, yeah.
$50,000.
I'm kind of curious, what would happen if we did it based on their total budget size? Do we have the total budget?
We've done that before, like a weighted.
Yeah, we could do a weighted average, like we could do that, right? We could do that as well.
We do that, except I do take Chris's point, which is that CCRSD does have an E&D reserve available to them, and CPS and the town doesn't.
Right.
Yeah,
that's true.
So I think they have different levers, right?
Yeah, no, that's true.
That's why
the school does have an E&D reserve, but they were also told by Moody's at the last bond review that Moody's was not happy that they were eating into it every year, and that's why the school tried to rebuild it. So if you force them to go after it again, you start them down the road of Moody's not being happy, and maybe they don't keep a AAA bond rating.
Right. Well, potentially, but they certainly they built it up all the way to the top. So I know they have they underspent in 21 because not on purpose, but because of COVID. So that was done prudently because we knew that there would be carry forwards to 22. So I agree with you, Dick. You're right. Nobody wants them to go to zero, but they have 1.7 million.
They also have tucked aside money in revolving accounts, and they've done stuff with their sped circuit breaker account. They've really put money in a lot of different places.
And prudently so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to be unfair to them. I'm just trying to figure out what's the right split. So Parashar, we've done that before on the weighted average because, I just know that there's more. I think what will happen is that the town will come in lower and the schools will come in higher because of the COLA adjustments that are locked in.
It hurts the town.
Well, it hurts the town.
It does hurt. Well, they certainly pay the price. That's true.
Okay, so then I would prefer not to do that. I'd prefer then the COLA. If I want to be a little bit more equitable, given that you've got the excess capacity that they've got more levers. So yeah, fair enough.
Okay. Anybody else have any ideas on how we could split it? Or should we do some math? And Carrie, you can bring the model up maybe just to show people what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think you might have to stop.
I will stop. I'll stop sharing. Let me see if I can figure that out. Let's see, stop share.
Chris, I got a question just about new resources for the school. Do they need to hire a significant amount of teachers to do sort of the COVID testing? Because I know in the elementary schools, they hired a lot more subs.
They may, I mean, to the extent that it's COVID related, I assume that they'll be paid for, right? So you have the federal
Oh,
reimbursement. Yeah,
that's
so
true. We could
I
use the
haven't
federal reimbursement money.
Right,
Okay,
right.
that's a
So,
good point.
Yeah. Did I do the right thing on sharing? Yeah, I think so, because I can see a different chart. Okay.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, take it away, Kerry.
Well, so I've just been calculating over here as you're talking, but so this is the model that you use. Here's right here the allocation that was made last year, or the total budget in the current fiscal year. Down here, you know, we've talked a lot about the 4.35%. This is the first calculation, is that we assume that property taxes, that we'll levy the same percentage of property taxes in the coming year. So we've talked about this. This would leave an unused levy capacity of the $4.3 million. The additional increment in property tax under this scenario is the 1.9 million. And that's the full amount available. That would mean that we would use zero additional unused levy capacity. So we wouldn't be eating into the unused levy capacity relative to the current fiscal year. This column here represents the increase to the existing tax base. So we net out the tax dollars that are raised because of new growth. And this is the estimated impact to the existing base. Under this scenario, the guidelines portion of the budget could increase by 2.18%. This column here we use as we learn about additional non-property tax revenues, we can plug them in here and then we can see what that does. So I had mentioned that the 3.5% increase that we heard today, that local aid would go up under the governor's budget, we can plug that in here. And assuming you are going to keep property tax at the same level, it would allow an increase. So it didn't change.
No, it did, didn't it? Oh, no, you're right. It didn't change. It changed on the right for some reason.
Yeah, that's my note. I don't know why it didn't change that, but it would allow, you can see $2.2 million to be divvied up amongst the guidelines accounts.
Versus the 1.9.
Right.
Do we want to go with that, or do we want to wait till we see the final budget?
So in that scenario, Carrie, you're using the money as additional funds to be spent by the town as opposed to reducing the increase?
Sure. And you could just as easily come over here and we could say, you know what, let's take it out of here. Oh, it doesn't look like, I'd have to go back and look at that. But this would mean that instead of the 2.18%, there's 1.85%.
You're right, Kathy. You can go either way, right? You can use it or not use it, right?
Good point.
Hey, Carrie, I don't know that you could, I don't know is perfectly fine, but what's your confidence level? Maybe this is the wrong way to ask it, but I'm just trying to get a sense of like the level of probability or confidence around this added 300K. Because, you know, quite frankly, it's a lot of money on, you know, that could be, you know, it would be nice to be able to vote on the aggregate amount as opposed to just wondering if it's going to come in or not, since we have to vote tonight. So I'm just trying to get a sense of your historical confidence around these these estimates that come out from the state.
So I've been working in local government for a long time. So, you know, I've been working on budgets in Massachusetts for over 20 years. It doesn't matter who the governor is. The governor's budget is the lowest point for state aid. The legislature only increases state aid. Will they increase it this year? You know, maybe not. Maybe what the governor proposes is pretty close to what the legislature will adopt and become the final number. But because an announcement was made, the governor is going to dip into the state's stabilization fund to be able to provide this level of aid. I'm very comfortable adjusting our estimates to match the budget. But when I say it's going to increase $297,000, that's an increase over what I was carrying. And I was carrying a level amount for Chapter 70, but I was carrying a 9% decrease in the unrestricted general government aid. So we haven't seen an increase in the unrestricted general government aid in quite some years. So I can't imagine if it's announced that the legislature is not going to be on board, because the legislature, they have a process where they have a committee that reviews revenue, and it's made up of Republicans and Democrats, and from the House or from both branches, and they come to a consensus revenue number. And so I'm very confident that the announcement today is at least what we will see.
So with that, and thank you for that, you know, I think it might be worthwhile to include that 300K in our calculation here. If you know, yeah, just based on your comments, Carrie, I think it might be helpful for us to kind of think that through a little bit with that number. I don't know what other thoughts here from other people.
I agree with you, Brian.
I do too.
Yeah, my instinct earlier in this conversation was that we leave it out, but that's partly an old negotiating instinct that you start low, because people will come back and look for more, and if this gives us a way to add more to respond to that. But given what Carrie is saying and the fact that there's been a public announcement, it feels disingenuous to not contemplate that change in state aid in what we're presenting. And from Carrie's experience, it sounds like we don't have to worry that we're not being, we are being conservative by including this initial number, because historically this initial number has been the starting point, the low end of what's likely to happen once it works its way through the legislature. So I think we should include it. I think to leave it out feels incomplete.
In the past, when we've done these budgets, we have not had this number available because we were doing the budgets earlier. And in the end, I don't think it really mattered, because the town, like if the town had higher expenses, but they, if they were having trouble meeting the budget, but then this additional revenue would come in and everything would end happily. So I don't know if it really makes a difference whether we add it in or not, because in the end result will be the same.
Well, I think that maybe if that's in the history, and I don't have that history since I've just joined the committee a couple months ago, maybe that makes it particularly important to be very clear what we're including, so that in the past, if there's been room to move a little bit because the state aid arrived later, we included the state aid later because of the timing, we need to make it clear that this includes an assumption that could change.
And keep in mind, this is a preliminary guideline too.
Right.
So, you know, the idea that if we were to include it here, I guess what I'm considering is, you know, Parshar's point about just being equitable here. 300,000 is 300,000, and if it's something that we can sort of think about, especially on the town side, that might be helpful. And then if for whatever reason that 297 or whatever the number was doesn't actually realize, it was a preliminary guideline based on based on all the information that we had at the time. We have to revise it.
Right, exactly.
Could I ask a technical question? Carrie, can you hit Zoom, like view Zoom a couple of notches up? I've been having trouble just even reading the screen. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Carrie, this thing that they announced today, so that's the revenue consensus guideline. They made an announcement today. Who made this announcement?
The governor's office. I don't know if it was the governor himself or the lieutenant governor. There was a meeting today. The Mass Municipal Association had a meeting.
Yeah.
The announcement was made that local aid, based on the consensus revenue estimates for growth for fiscal 22, and the interest in utilizing some of the state stabilization fund, state aid would be going up 3.5% in the governor's budget proposal.
So they're preliming what's going to come out at the end of the month. Is that what they're doing?
Well, what's going to come out, you know, in a matter of days on Wednesday, next Wednesday.
Okay, and that's when his budget's coming out. So they're giving us a preview. You think that's what this was?
I know that's what it was, because it does happen every year.
Okay, all right. That was my question. Is this a new thing? Because I didn't even know they did that. I thought you just waited until the budget.
No, I'm used to it happening on Friday, or actually the Mass Municipal Association conference is typically Friday and Saturday, but it happens to be this year because it's virtual. It's Thursday and Friday. So it hit me out of the blue because I wasn't expecting the announcement today.
Yeah.
It's typically on the Friday of the conference.
Okay. Well.
So Chris, I have a question.
Yeah.
Which is under the column of tax increase percent.
Yeah.
And it's 2.71.
Right.
Do you remember what we spent a lot of time last year on the sustainability?
Yes.
And I'm wondering, do you remember what that percentage was that we allocated?
What the SGR is?
Yeah.
0.645.
That's what that is. But do you remember what our final, no, on this, in this framework, what our tax increase was last year?
2.6.
What, when we did the guideline, so what didn't actually happen, but when we did it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mary, do you remember?
I do. It was 2.68.
Okay.
2.68. And we were trying to, over time, accomplish a downward slope.
Yes.
And I think we were trying to get to 2.17. But
Correct.
I'm just wondering, have we considered that at all in this calculation?
Nope. Not, well, I mean, yes, and not in this calculation. We haven't intentionally said lower it for the SGR.
Okay, I'm wondering if we should be considering that.
I'm not quite sure I follow. Do you want to cut the
I want to
increase to
decrease the
0.64?
increase. I want to decrease the increase.
So you want to go straight to the sustainable growth rate for an
No,
increase?
I don't want to go to 0.68. But in last year's, I think we were, in looking at the 5-year projection, I think it was something like 2.17. And I'm just wondering, if we did 2.68 last year, should we be thinking about that or a lower percent increase, tax increase?
I'll just say that the sustainable growth rate to me is unrealistic because it doesn't allow us to meet contractual COLA obligations.
So we need a 2.71 increase to get to meet those obligations?
We need pretty close, yeah. A huge part of our budget is salaries and what we're offering for just COLA, forget steps and lanes, but just COLA for our collective bargainings is something that we've got to cover, or we lower things and we say to the budgeting entities, find the money somewhere else.
We can
So
do
the-
that, but you know, we start out in the hole, right? So we're
Do that. We could
we're over $1 million in the hole, so we can do it.
Yep, we could.
I do think if we just want to revisit the whole SGR concept, the idea was to bring budgets into alignment with costs of living, wage increases generally, and be a forward marker for how we are negotiating these COLAs. So yes, there's some pain here. I do think that Dee has a point that we're not trying to get to 0.68 or 0.65, but the cost of living and the inflation rate is actually decreased since the last time we looked. It was 2.16 and now it's 0.65. And we're advocating for something which is actually going in the opposite direction of our sustainable rate. So I think they're, just taking it into account is a worthwhile exercise. We really need to, we made a commitment to it. We've put it on our finance committee calendar to review it every year. And if it doesn't inform us, if we just look at it and just go, oh, pshaw, it doesn't matter, then it's kind of not worth the paper it's printed on. So we need to at least consider it.
But while we're considering it, don't we have to also think about some of the things that have happened since that was set as a goal? I mean, again, I wasn't here, but I presume that goal was set before a global pandemic and before the kind of revenue losses that we're experiencing this year. If Concord's other revenues were rising the way they usually do, we're lucky that the real estate collections hold. So that's the bulk of our resources, but we did have other sources of revenues that have declined substantially this year. So, it's a worthwhile goal. I'm not arguing with the goal. I'm just wondering if it doesn't need to be considered in the context of this extraordinary year.
Lois, I would agree with you. And I think, and I wasn't here when the SGR was set up either. And I think circumstances have changed in multiple ways, including the trends that Dean talked about, right? Low inflation seems to be locked in for a long time overall in the economy. And yet you've got potential collective bargaining agreements that grow faster than inflation. And I think, maybe we ought to take the lead in maybe having a little bit more of a town-wide effort to examine some of these things and develop strategies for collective bargaining, approaching collective bargaining. But I think it may also call for us to kind of revisit philosophically, what is the SGR? What are we using it for? And how are we setting it as well? So I view this as a series of interlocking conversations, but for the here and now, I'm comfortable with the proposal Chris laid out, and then figuring out a way to distribute it, at least for this year, and then, having the broader conversation over the next 12 to 15 months.
Well, when those contracts are set, they're set for 3 years. So that's going to be, that's not going to be in.
Well, they are, maybe they won't be, right? So it was interesting to hear from Stephen, and I don't think we heard that yet from the schools, but that in the past year, people went back to
a 1 year
short term on purpose because they understood that we're in kind of a strange period. So you don't know, we may be that it could be a negotiating technique that they use to keep it short. But the background to this is the folks that, it was it's a very good idea because we could see that that the growth we were having in the town cost was well beyond inflation. And so there was a question of what's really, are we becoming unaffordable? And the dialogue was, how do we come up with a way to benchmark that, right? And to inform the school and the town and the folks who are negotiating these contracts that, you know, you have something that isn't sustainable, right? We can't keep going at 2 times the rate of inflation or 3 times or 4 times the rate of inflation without it catching up with us. So again, it's young. It's maybe 2 years old, right? So we're early days in using it. So we knew we would have to figure out how do we use it. My own, you know, in July, we had the same conversation because when I did the calculation, I said to folks, it feels strange to me to come out and say it's 0.6, less than 1%. Yes, inflation is less than 1%, but we are in the middle of a pandemic. Is that what we're really going to use? And the answer, which I thought was very rational, was, yeah, we are going to calculate it because lots of things happen in the world and you still want to keep a hold of this important benchmark. You can decide how you want to use it. And I think that's what we're trying to do tonight. I would not advocate for saying, you know, we should take a haircut. Simply for it, but I did think about it when I was looking at the 2.18 and the 2.71 and the on the increase to the base. 2.71 is under 3%. It's around where we were last year. Last year was a tough year. I went back and looked at what the town did in 2008, or from the fallout from what happened in the economy in 2008. And in the years when we would have been impacted through the guideline process, there was an increase and then there was a serious decline. So we ended up playing around in not a very smooth way with this once before. But that was a different animal. It wasn't the same as a pandemic, but it was recessionary. So Concord has had periods when they had 0 tax increase or some declines to deal with economic weakness. So we have done it. But I personally, I think, you know, somewhere, if you come in lower than 2, you know, they're going to have to find a lot. You're asking them, you know, my view is I don't think that the guideline was meant to cut services, to fire teachers or firemen or policemen, or, you know, stop buildings from being run or built and so forth. I don't think that was my view. I didn't think that was the goal of the benchmark of the SGR. And the pandemic to me is a temporary dip in revenues. That doesn't mean, you know, we don't keep the fiscal reins on. We should, but I don't think we should use the SGR to jolt what's already a difficult position. That's my view.
Well, I wasn't expecting a jolt.
Okay.
I think if we matched what we did last year, at least we're still recognizing that, yes, our taxes are going up and it becomes harder for people to live in the town.
So how much would you want to take it down, Dee?
I would say take it down to 2.65. I don't know how big a difference that's going to make, if it's going to make, you know, if people or if the town won't be able to make its budget, or it'll be less than what they had last year. I don't know.
Carrie can show us, I think.
So Chris, when you get a chance.
Hi, Phil. Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with you. And I do think the sustainable growth rate takes account of the current economic situation, which is a global pandemic. It's the sustainable growth rate, as you calculated it, is based on the current inflation rate and the 10-year bond rate. Is that right?
10-year treasury, right.
10-year treasury. So those are all things that are dynamic and have been lowered because of the pandemic. So it's painful, but I think we do need to take account of it. And I've been on this committee long enough to remember what was called I forget what we call it, the curve.
The Randall curve.
The Randall curve.
The Randall curve that showed the divergence. It's a V or a open K between our tax rate going back to the early 2000s and inflation, and it's just getting worse. And so even though it's painful, we got to, one of the reasons why we agreed to do the sustainable growth rate was to incentivize the budget entities not to agree to such large increases in the COLAs. So I do think Dee is right. We got to take account of it, even though it may reduce our tax rate. I don't think we should go down to 1.6, but we should reduce it somewhat.
Can I just say that this year, when the people are going to be negotiating COLA raises with the teachers and the people in the town, these people have had really hard working conditions this last year. So going in there and asking them to take a lower rate than they've been used to, or to take a lower COLA, I think this is the wrong year to ask, to expect that of our negotiators and to expect that of our teachers and other people that we pay in town. Because I mean, yes, we can calculate a number and we can look at the metrics, but if you're to be a realist and sit across the table from people and say, well, you know, the inflation rate is 1.1%, that's going to be, realistically, I don't think we're going to get there.
Mary, I agree with you. And I'll further add, you know, and I've said this in the past before, I personally, I don't think we're using the right metrics, the right indices, economic indicators to calculate the SGR. But that's a separate discussion, frankly. But I think it is unrealistic for us to do that, Mary, at this time. And frankly, even in the future. I mean, I will, you know, at the end of the day, if we come in with something totally unrealistic, it just hurts our credibility with town meeting and with citizens.
Exactly.
And so, you know, for the sake of sending a signal to arbitrarily take down the number at this time, down to 2.5, I would not support that personally. I mean, now I don't think it's the right climate and the time to have that sort of signal being sent. And I would like to send a broader signal that's a little bit higher. And I talked about that earlier. This is a conversation that needs more folks and a whole set of other variables to consider.
If we add in the, was it the 300,000 that Carrie identified from the state, if we do that, that takes the number down, right, Carrie, to under around, is it 2.5? Is that where it ends up? Or
So, yeah, I mean, so what I just did was, if you take 200, if you take 200,000 of the surplus and apply it to reduce property taxes to get property taxes to 2.5%, you still have 97,000. So you would have a 2.07% to divvy up. Or
what's the total amount, dollar amount, Carrie?
it stays the same, right? Or it goes.
It's 1.8 gross, then you would have to take out the 426.
So it's less than we had before.
Oh, yeah, why is it less?
Yes.
Why is it less if you're adding 97,000 to it?
Because I applied here, I used 200 of the 300 to reduce the property taxes.
So then that gives 200,000 to the guideline spending. I mean, that gives 100 to guideline.
Yes.
And the guideline was 1.9. So now why is it?
Yeah, why is it lower?
Why did it go down to 1.8?
Let's see, Mary, this is why.
It was 1.9 before we took away 400,000 for the schools. So now that's
Right, but that's what's on this page.
That's what this is.
It's gross.
That's what this is.
column N is gross, right? Total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before the reallocation.
For the reallocation, yeah.
Yeah, so there's some.
There you go. I think that's right.
Yeah, and
I'm having difficulty following this. If the state is giving the town 300,000,
More than we expected.
more than we expected, then if we go back to one of Chris's page, it's more revenue that the town has, so the town still has that revenue to spend. It's not like we're taking money away from the town to spend. We're just not funding the bogey with increased taxes. It's coming from another source.
That's what Carrie's trying to do to the spreadsheet right now, I think.
Kathy, I think in the past, what we would have done is we would have determined what we think we're getting from state aid. And we would have included all that in money available. And this year we reduced it because we thought we wouldn't get it. And now we're saying, no, we shouldn't have reduced it. We should add it back. So it's not like we had this windfall and we're saying, let's give it to the budgeting entities instead of reducing taxes. This would have been the normal way we did things. I hope that made sense.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, so,
There we are.
okay. All right. So now I have more money and less to the tax base. I like that.
So you split it.
So how did you do that? You gave 200,000 to the tax base, Carrie?
Yes.
She
And
levied
what-
200,000 less.
If you gave 200 there, wouldn't the other sources only be 97,000 because you gave away 200,000?
But I subtracted it from here.
I see. Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so how much do we have for guideline then? The 2 million?
4 million.
2043. I like that. The taxpayers
I like
paying
that
less, and we have more.
And
We should make this an explicit assumption, though, in the documents we send out to the 3 budget units.
Yes, we should.
Right, we should.
Right, that we relied on this. Yep.
Well, and that we gave 200,000 to the property tax owners.
Carrie, wait, so we had $1.9 million, and then we had this to go to the guideline, and now we took out of that 300,000, 200 went to lower the taxes, and 100,000 went to increasing the guideline. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. That very good. Yeah, that is good.
And if it turns out that we get more money from the state,
Yes.
we can then, based on what we're seeing from the budgeting entities, we can decide whether or not the excess goes to lower taxes further, getting us closer to the SGR, or whether we need more in the guidelines spending. Is that right?
Right. I mean, they'll come back to us by then to sell us what they actually want for the budget, right? So yeah, we'll have another big input as well.
Right, exactly.
So Carrie, I just want to make sure I understand. So when you said you gave it to the taxpayers, does that mean we're giving $1.2 million? Not just $1 million?
What million?
I'm just thinking.
Adding the free cash and
Yeah, I'm just thinking about when you're saying you're giving it to the taxpayer, I'm just trying to.
We're going to levy 200,000 less under.
Okay, that's the way I was thinking. I just wanted to make sure I had it right in my head. Okay.
You're increasing the other revenue sources. If you want to think of it technically, you're not. You're not dipping into free cash. You're just.
Good. Okay. I just
increasing
wanted
other
to make
revenue
sure
sources.
I wasn't confusing how we were getting it. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want a motion that we accept this before we allocate it, or do you want to allocate it? I would like to make a little bit of progress here. So
That's a great idea, Mary. Progress.
I would like that too. Progress at 10 o'clock.
do you want a motion, Chris?
Yes, I would like a motion, Mary. Thank
Okay,
you.
I move that we set the preliminary total guideline, including the amount for the enrollment shift at a 2.29%.
Second.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to do a roll call then. Any other discussion? Okay, then I'm going to call a vote. Unfortunately, can you take down this screen for a second?
Yeah.
Carrie, because I can't see anybody. Thank you. Okay. All right. Chris Reynolds? Yes. Phil Swain?
Sorry, yes.
Parashar Patel?
Yes.
Mary Hartman?
Yes.
Dean Banfield?
Yes.
Dee Ortner?
Yes.
Ray Andrews?
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo?
Yes.
Lois Wassoff?
Yes.
Greg Gorello?
Yes.
Dick Jameson?
Yes.
Brian Taylor?
Yes.
Andrea Zoll?
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous. Very good. So we can go back to the allocation now. So Carrie, you can come back up. Thank you. Okay, so now we have 2,043,799 to allocate.
Right.
So, and do we agree that we will take the, is it 426, I think?
Yep.
Am I right, Carrie? Is that the number, 426 for the enrollment? Yeah, 426. We'll take the 426 off the top, if you will, and allocate that to CCRSD. People comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I get people shaking their heads, so that's good. Okay, so we've got 2,043,000 or 2,044,000 minus the 426. 1.
1,617,799.
Got a set of columns over on the right that look
Yeah.
like we could just manipulate those percentages. We might be getting there, getting somewhere.
So Carrie, how did you break out this 1,000,006 among the?
Oh, that was just based on budget.
A weighted average?
Weighted average.
Okay.
Can you leave
Okay.
that one and do the one that Christine did on the COLA on the side, just so we can compare the dollar amounts?
What Mary wants on the COLA? Mary has it on the COLA.
Oh, yeah, well, Mary had it, somebody had the COLA numbers,
Yeah.
right?
You want to talk about COLA, Mary?
Yeah, so
Compare the two side by side,
yeah, the town would be 450.
450, yep.
Rough numbers, 450. Who's next? CPS would be 750. CCRSD would be 300.
And that's on a lesser amount, right? Or is,
This was based on FY21.
right.
That's close enough.
Right.
12% on FY21, yeah.
Okay.
So the one in column
Mary.
Y is
Hey, Mary,
total budget, right?
But
Hey, Mary, is that, that puts this at 1.5, the COLA, when the last iteration, it was at 1.45. So was CPS 700 or 750?
it was I had 700 before, and then I went back and.
You changed it. Okay.
Why did I do that? I don't remember why I did that, Brian. We can go back to 700, thank you.
So,
It rounds, we can round it down.
yeah, it's not that different between the two, if you look at them, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, either way, if it's weighted average on the budget or
Yeah, not that different.
really not that different.
That's because salary is such a big part of everybody's.
Yeah, right. And
Well,
CPS does get the largest, which is, you know, consistent with what we've seen, but you know.
I don't know, I'm comfortable giving the 508, the numbers in column Y, right? It's on the budget,
Yeah.
straightforward.
It's fine with me. It's
Let's
way to
just
do
do
it.
that.
It's not that different from COLA, so that makes me
They're-
feel good.
And it
They're
covers
gonna
COLA.
come back.
It covers COLA, plus we got the enrollment.
Yeah, it covers COLA except for CPS and CCRSD. It doesn't cover COLA. It
No,
doesn't-
your COLAs are all covered with the
That's right, you're
numbers
right,
Yeah, you have to
allocated
gross them up
in
a little.
Y.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Do it.
Well, there's $167,000 that can still be spread amongst those three, right?
But
No.
You're thinking
well,
of-
in column Y,
That's
it's
Mary's
already
column.
spread.
That's Mary's column.
Yeah, Mary's column was before we raised the budget. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
we're going with weighted average, I think, which covers them all, right?
Yep.
So
Let's
this
just do
is
that.
good.
Ooh, people happy. All right.
For the record, Mary, it's 10.
We're just punch drunk. What are you talking about?
Mary, for the record, it's 10:15. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
progress.
exactly.
relative to last year.
That's
Oh
progress.
my gosh. Oh my gosh.
It's a
you're right.
factor in our happiness.
I set the expectation. So there you go. So
All right. If people want any more discussion, are you ready for a vote?
Ready for a motion. I make a motion.
Motion. All right, let's make a motion.
Make a motion to distribute the 2 million by taking 426,000 to get set aside for CCRSD enrollment and distributing the 1.617 according to the spreadsheet shown here. You need the numbers, 508 for the town, 739 for CPS and 370 for CCRSD.
Plus the
It's
other.
426.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
already
plus the
said that.
426.
The 426.
You have to add the both.
But
It's
he
7.
mentioned that at the top.
Okay. So do you want to clarify that motion, Parashar, and then we'll have
Yep.
a second?
So make a motion to take the 2.043, set aside 426,000 for CCRCD enrollment, split the remaining 1.618 by allocating 508,000 to the town, 739 to CPS and 370 to CCRSD.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, so Carrie, if you can take down that chart, I can do a roll call vote.
very good.
Okay, so this is Chris Reynolds. Yes. Phil Swain,
Yes.
Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Ray Andrews,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
Greg Gorello,
Yes.
Dick Jameson,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll.
Yes.
Okay. Congratulations, team.
Congratulations,
We did it.
Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
Good work.
All right.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Yes, we have go ahead,
Do
Mary.
we have to go back to the full committee?
I know.
Oh, yeah, we do. We do.
The other meeting.
That's right,
Yeah.
we do. You're exactly right. But thank you
Carrie,
for
can you
telling us that.
forward that sheet so that we can all just have a copy? I didn't write every single number down, so it would be helpful to have that forwarded in some form.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So we're going
So I
to,
move to adjourn the guidelines committee meeting.
Second.
all
Second.
right, so we'll have a roll call to adjourn. All right, Phil Swain,
Yes.
Chris Reynolds, yes. Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Ray Andrews,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff,
Yes.
Greg Gorello,
Yes.
Dick Jameson,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
Yes.
Andrea Zoll. All right, so we will adjourn and then come back and make a recommendation to ourselves.
It's just the most
I
insane
hope we
thing.
accept it. Okay. So the
Is there any way
subcommittee,
to is there any way to hold the meetings together
oh
concurrently?
my Lord, that's another topic for another discussion. Yeah,
The
so,
school committee does it all the time.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm calling this meeting to order. I need a roll call. Brian, are you here? Say yes.
Here.
Mary Hartman here. Dean,
Yes.
Greg,
Here.
Yes.
Chris,
yes,
Dee,
Yes.
Bill, Ray,
Yes. Here.
Kathy,
Twice.
Kathy,
Yes.
Lois,
Yes.
Parashar,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'll entertain a motion from the Budget Subcommittee.
okay. So the Budget Subcommittee has approved preliminary guidelines, and we are recommending those to the full Finance Committee. You want me to read them? I don't know if I can read them. Well, can I just say the ones that the Finance Subcommittee voted, we are now,
That works. for
Yeah,
me.
I think that's
Yeah.
fine.
I think that's
Yeah,
fine.
I think
All right, so
there's a
that's
good
my
record
motion.
here.
We're
Great.
asking for
Second.
approval.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
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 Okay, let's go around. Brian,
Here. Yes.
Myself, Mary Hartman, yes. Dean,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Dee,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Ray,
Yes, okay.
Kathy,
Yes.
Walt Lewis,
Yes.
Parashar,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
It's unanimous and the chair so declares. Okay, before we adjourn this meeting, we had some other items on our agenda. We are not going to entertain a reserve fund transfer tonight. And in the interest of time, unless anybody has an urgent observer report that they need to give, I would like to suspend observer reports until we meet again in February. Is that okay? Does anybody have an urgent observer report they would like to give?
No.
Yeah, I just have one comment.
Yep.
Which is we don't meet next week. And at the February 2nd school committee meeting, they will have a review of all their budgets, or they'll have a presentation on their budgets, which is the same one we'll have 2 days later. But if you're interested in hearing what it's going to be, it'll be on February 2nd, 5 p.m.
Thank you.
Great. Yep.
Anybody else have anything they need to say? I have things to say, but I'm not going to say them tonight. Do we have a CFO report, Terry?
No, we don't.
And we have no correspondences that I'm aware of? And are there any citizens? I don't think there are any citizens that.
There are two that are still here.
Okay, let's see. Do I have any citizen comments? No, I don't hear any. Before we go though, I just want to let people know that Wade was not here tonight. You probably noticed that, and that's because his mother is very ill. So he contacted me and he's with her, and he's grateful that he's able to be with her. So I just wanted you to know that and keep him in your thoughts. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, Brian.
Aye. Yes. Here. See you later.
Myself, goodbye. Dean.
Bye-bye.
Greg.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
Dee.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Ray.
Okay, yes, bye.
Kathy.
Yes.
Lois.
Yes.
Parashar.
No.
Just to keep it non-unanimous.
Keeping you on your toes.
Want to change your vote, Parashar?
Yes.
Dick.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
You hang in there, Andrea. Good for you. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you. You have a 2-week break.
Good night,
Oh,
everybody.
thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.